You are a monster. My daughter-in-law sneered across the Thanksgiving table. I simply set down my glass of sweet tea and replied, "How does it feel to know that the ultimate betrayal is coming your way today?" Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach an ungrateful child a lesson they will never forget. My name is Deacon Wright. I am 69 years old, and for decades I worked my hands to the bone so my son could have a life I only dreamed of. I thought I raised a man. Instead, I raised a coward who let greed blind him. The smell of roasted turkey collard greens and candied yams filled the air, a cruel contrast to the bitter tension suffocating the room. The turkey was still warm on the table when Courtney slammed a thick legal document right next to my plate. It was a medical power of attorney. She stood there in her designer dress looking down at me with pure disgust. "The transport van from the state psychiatric facility is waiting outside right now, old man," she announced, her voice dripping with venom. "You are going to a place for crazy people where you belong. You have become a burden, a liability, and frankly a monster who stands in the way of our future. We are done dealing with your delusions." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I slowly wiped my mouth with a linen napkin and looked directly at my son. Javon sat at the opposite end of the table, staring intently at his mashed potatoes. He was 35 years old, wearing a suit I essentially paid for, living a lifestyle I secretly funded, and he could not even muster the courage to meet his father's eyes. This was the boy I carried on my shoulders through the tough streets of our old neighborhood. The boy I worked double shifts at the post office and the auto shop to put through college. Now he was just a shell of a man, letting his entitled white wife spit on his roots and erase the man who gave him everything. Courtney paced around the dining room, acting as if she already owned the place. She looked at the vintage photographs on the mantel pictures of my late wife, my ancestors, our proud African-American heritage, and scoffed. "Do you know how exhausting it is to pretend to care about you in this outdated dump?" She laughed, a harsh, grating sound. This house was bought with honest sweat. It survived recessions and hardships. Now she wanted to steal it and sell it to the highest bidder. "Javon and I have plans. Big plans. We need capital to expand my boutique, and your stubborn refusal to leverage this property has forced our hand. You are losing your mind, Deacon. You forget things. You stumble around. It is tragic, really, but it makes this whole process so much easier. The state will take custody of your health, and Javon, as your only son, will take custody of your estate. It is the natural order of things." I looked back at Javon, my own flesh and blood. "Is this how it ends, son?" I asked, my voice steady and deep, carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken sacrifices. "Are you really going to let her throw me in a padded cell so you can steal my home?" Javon finally looked up, his face pale and sweating. "It is for your own good, Dad. You are not well. Courtney knows what is best. We cannot manage your episodes anymore. It is time for you to go." The sheer cowardice in his voice was the final nail in the coffin of my paternal love. I felt no sorrow, only a cold, calculating clarity. I reached for my glass, took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea, and placed it gently back on the coaster. I leaned forward, resting my weathered hands on the mahogany table. Courtney smiled, a wicked, triumphant grin, thinking she had won. That is when I looked her dead in the eyes and delivered the words that would shatter her perfect illusion. "How does it feel to know that the ultimate betrayal is coming your way today?" Courtney let out a sharp, theatrical laugh. She picked up her wine glass, swirling the expensive red liquid as if she were celebrating a massive business acquisition rather than institutionalizing her husband's father. "What are you even babbling about, old man? Your mind is completely gone. Javon, tell them to come in. I cannot stand looking at him for another second." Javon swallowed hard, nodding nervously. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text message. Within seconds, the heavy oak front door swung open. Two tall, broad-shouldered men wearing dark blue jackets stepped into the hallway. They looked like medical orderlies, the kind of men hired to physically restrain combative patients. They walked into the dining room with heavy boots thudding against the hardwood floor. Courtney crossed her arms, stepping back to give them room. "Take him gently if you can, but if he resists, do what you have to do," she ordered, pointing a manicured finger right at my chest. "He is completely unhinged and might become violent." I remained seated in my chair, as still as a stone statue. I did not try to run. I did not beg for mercy. I just watched the two men approach me with a quiet sense of anticipation. Javon stood up, backing away toward the kitchen, running his hands over his face in a pathetic display of fake anxiety. "Just cooperate, Dad. Please do not make a scene. It will only make it worse." The orderlies flanked me on both sides. Courtney pulled out her phone, ready to record my humiliating departure, no doubt planning to use the footage as further proof of my supposed insanity for the judge. But the men did not reach for any restraints. They did not pull out a straitjacket or a syringe. Instead, they stood perfectly still, waiting for a cue. But the cue was not coming from my son. It was coming from me. I gave them a subtle nod. The man on my right turned his back to me and faced my son. He reached into the inner pocket of his dark blue jacket, but he did not pull out medical equipment. He pulled out a gold shield. "FBI, you are under arrest." The agent announced, his voice echoing through the dining room like a thunderclap. Courtney dropped her phone. It hit the floor with a loud crack. "What is this? What is going on here?" she shrieked, her confident facade crumbling in a millisecond. The second agent moved with lightning speed, grabbing Javon by the arm and spinning him around to face the wall. "Javon Wright, you are under arrest for federal money laundering, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes. You have the right to remain silent." Javon let out a pathetic whimper, his knees buckling as the cold steel handcuffs clicked securely around his wrists. "Dad," he cried out, his eyes wide with absolute terror. "Dad, what is happening? Help me." I stood up from my chair, smoothing out the wrinkles in my suit. I looked at the boy I raised, now a criminal begging for salvation. "I cannot help you, Javon," I replied, my voice echoing with finality. "I am just a crazy monster, remember?" Courtney's jaw fell open as the reality of the situation crashed down upon her. The trap had snapped shut and they were the ones caught inside. But to understand how a father ends up sending the feds after his own son on Thanksgiving, we have to go back exactly 3 weeks. 3 weeks of secrets, lies, and hidden poisons that led to this very moment. It all started on a quiet Tuesday morning when I offered to take Javon's suits to the dry cleaner. I was simply trying to help out around the house, a habit ingrained in me from a lifetime of hard work. As I checked the pockets of his expensive navy blue suit jacket, a jacket I had purchased for his birthday, my fingers brushed against something hard and cylindrical. I pulled it out, expecting a breath mint container or a travel cologne. Instead, I found a small amber prescription bottle. The label was partially scratched off, but the details were clear enough. It was a high-grade antipsychotic medication, a heavy sedative used to treat severe schizophrenia and acute manic episodes. I frowned, adjusting my reading glasses. The patient name was blanked out with a black marker, but the prescribing physician was a Dr. Silas Vance. I had never heard of him. Neither Javon nor Courtney had any history of mental illness that required such severe pharmaceutical intervention. I held the bottle up to the light. It was half empty. A cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach as my mind began to race, racing past the initial confusion and landing directly on a terrifying realization. For the past month, I had been experiencing inexplicable bouts of severe dizziness. There were mornings when my vision blurred, when my legs felt like lead weights, and a heavy, thick fog settled over my brain. I had chalked it up to old age, to my body finally slowing down after decades of grueling manual labor. I had even considered making an appointment with my cardiologist, but standing there holding that bottle, the pieces of the puzzle aggressively snapped into place. Every single time I felt that debilitating lethargy, it was shortly after breakfast. More specifically, it was shortly after Courtney handed me my morning tea. My daughter-in-law had suddenly taken a keen interest in my morning routine about 4 weeks ago. She claimed she had found a special organic herbal blend at her high-end farmer's market. She said it would help with my joints and boost my immune system. Every morning without fail, she would bring a steaming ceramic mug right to my bedside. I heard her footsteps approaching down the hallway. I quickly shoved the pill bottle deep into my own pocket just as my bedroom door creaked open. Courtney walked in wearing her silk robe, balancing a silver tray with that familiar white mug. Her face was stretched into a painfully bright smile, but her eyes were cold, dead, and calculating. "Good morning, Deacon," she chirped, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "I brewed your favorite herbal tea. You need to drink every last drop so you can stay healthy and strong for us." She set the tray on my nightstand and hovered over me like a vulture waiting for its prey to expire. I looked at the tea. The dark liquid smelled of chamomile and peppermint, but underneath the fragrant herbs there was a faint, bitter chemical scent I had previously ignored. "Thank you, Courtney," I said, keeping my voice level and raspy, playing the part of the tired old man. "Just leave it there. I will drink it as soon as it cools down a bit." Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She crossed her arms, her manicured nails tapping impatiently against her elbows. You really should drink it while it is hot, Deacon. It loses its potency if it sits too long. Drink up. I picked up the mug, letting the warmth seep into my palms. I brought it to my lips, feigning a sip but keeping my mouth tightly closed. Delicious, I murmured. I just need to use the restroom first. I will finish it right after. She narrowed her eyes, studying me for a moment before finally nodding. Do not forget, she warned, turning on her heel and marching out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. The second I heard her footsteps retreat down the stairs, I sprang into action. The lethargy I had been faking vanished instantly. I walked over to the large potted ficus plant sitting by my bedroom window. With a steady hand, I poured the entire contents of the mug into the dark soil. I watched the liquid seep into the dirt, knowing that this poisonous concoction had been slowly destroying my mind for weeks. I rinsed the mug in my bathroom sink, leaving just a tiny residue at the bottom to make it look convincingly consumed. Then I set it back on the tray. If they wanted to play a wicked game of deception, I was going to beat them at it. I waited exactly 20 minutes, giving the imaginary sedatives time to supposedly kick in. Then I began my performance. I stumbled out of my bedroom, dragging my feet heavily against the hardwood floor. I let my shoulders slump and my eyes droop half-closed. I bumped my shoulder hard against the hallway wall, making a loud thud. I groaned, clutching my head. I staggered toward the living room where Courtney was sitting on the sofa, scrolling through her phone. To sell the illusion, I tripped over the edge of the oriental rug and slammed into a decorative side table. A heavy crystal vase tumbled to the floor, shattering into dozens of sharp, jagged pieces. Courtney did not jump up to help me. She did not ask if I was hurt or if I needed a doctor. Instead, a look of gleeful triumph flashed across her pale face. She instantly raised her smartphone, pointing the camera lens directly at my supposedly disoriented form. "Oh no, Deacon, are you having another one of your episodes?" She narrated loudly for the video recording, ensuring her voice sounded filled with fake pity and distress. "You are so confused lately. You just destroyed my favorite vase. You do not even know where you are, do you?" She stepped closer, keeping the camera steady, capturing my slumped posture and the broken glass surrounding my feet. I stared at her, letting my jaw hang slack, breathing heavily, pretending to be trapped in a pharmaceutical haze. This was her master plan. She was manufacturing a digital archive of my supposed mental decline. She was building a bulletproof case to present to a judge, proving that Deacon Wright was a danger to himself and completely incapable of managing his own life. I kept up the act, swaying slightly on my feet. But as she moved closer, shoving the phone aggressively into my face to capture my glazed expression, the screen illuminated brightly. A push notification slid down from the top edge of her smartphone. My vision was perfectly clear and my mind was sharper than ever. I read the bold text message instantly. The sender was saved under the name Viper. The message was not a simple inquiry from a friend or a note from her struggling boutique. It was a brutal, desperate threat. "Did that old black man sign the house papers yet? We are out of patience. Tell Javon the interest doubles tomorrow. If we do not get the deed by the end of the week, we are coming for blood." The sheer gravity of those words hit me like a freight train. This was not just about a greedy daughter-in-law wanting to speed up her inheritance. This was not just about putting me in a home so she could redecorate my house. Javon and Courtney were in deep, unimaginable trouble. They owed money to ruthless, dangerous people. Loan sharks. They were using my life, my home, and my sanity as collateral to save their own miserable skins. They were systematically poisoning me to steal my property and pay off a violent underworld debt. Courtney hastily swiped the notification away, thinking my sedated brain could not comprehend what had just flashed before my eyes. She lowered the phone, satisfied with her footage. "Just stay there and do not move, old man," she sneered, dropping the fake compassionate act entirely. "I will get the broom. You are practically a walking vegetable at this point." As she turned to walk to the kitchen, a cold, deadly fire ignited in my veins. They thought they were dealing with a helpless, retired mechanic. They thought they could easily manipulate the system and discard me like trash. They had no idea who I truly was. They had no idea about the multi-million-dollar real estate empire I controlled from the shadows. I was not a victim. I was a sleeping giant, and they had just kicked me fully awake. I needed to see my lawyer immediately. The time for playing the gentle father was over. It was time to show them exactly why I survived the hardest streets in the city and how I built my kingdom. I left the broken glass scattered on the hardwood floor and walked out the back door while Courtney was busy looking for a broom to sweep up her staged crime scene. The sluggish shuffle in my step vanished the very moment my heavy boots hit the pavement outside. I straightened my posture, rolling my shoulders back and taking a deep breath of the crisp morning air. An hour later, I stepped out of a private security elevator and walked into the sprawling glass-walled office of Harrington and Associates, located right in the heart of the financial district. The receptionist, a sharp young professional, immediately stood up and nodded respectfully. "Good morning, Mr. Wright. Mr. Harrington is expecting you right now." I walked past the heavy mahogany doors into a massive corner room overlooking the bustling city skyline. To my son and his incredibly entitled wife, I was just an old retired mechanic and former postal worker living out his final days in a gentrifying neighborhood. They thought my modest brick house was my only asset in this world. They had absolutely no idea that I owned the commercial high-rise where Courtney leased the space for her failing fashion boutique. They had no idea that my limited liability company controlled tens of millions of dollars in prime commercial real estate across the entire state. I had built an absolute empire, quietly letting the world underestimate me. Now that underestimated old man was sitting across from his lead attorney, ready to burn his own blood to the ground. Harrington adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses and slid a thick leather-bound folder across the polished desk. "You were right to come in, Deacon." Harrington began, his tone strictly professional but carrying an edge of grim sympathy. "I ran a full comprehensive audit on the commercial properties and your personal accounts just as you asked me to do yesterday afternoon. The situation is far worse than a few missing dollars." He opened the folder, flattening the pages with his hand. "Let us start with your daughter-in-law. Courtney has not paid a single dime of rent on her luxury boutique space in 8 months. She owes your holding company over $60,000 in back rent and late penalties. She has been actively ignoring every single eviction warning and financial notice our property managers sent her way. She thinks she is completely untouchable because the landlord on paper is just some faceless corporate entity. She does not know the faceless corporate entity is the exact same man she makes poison tea for every single morning." I felt my jaw tighten so hard my teeth ached. I had explicitly instructed the management company to give her some financial leeway a year ago, knowing the retail business was tough. I wanted her to succeed for Javon's sake, to build a stable life for my grandson. That silent grace was repaid with literal poison. But that is not the worst part of this mess. Harrington continued flipping to a highly sensitive bank document flagged with red tabs. 2 weeks ago, a second mortgage was taken out on your primary residence, the brick house you currently live in. The loan was fully approved and processed for $200,000. I stared at the paper, feeling a cold, dangerous fury radiating through my chest. I never signed any loan documents. I own that house free and clear. I paid off the original mortgage 20 years ago with blood and sweat. Harrington pointed a silver pen to a signature line at the bottom of the page. "I know that, Deacon, but someone claiming to be you signed this document in front of a licensed notary. A notary whose license we are currently investigating for fraudulent practices. The signature is a decent forgery, but it is a forgery nonetheless. The funds were dispersed directly into a joint checking account held by Javon and Courtney. My own son forged my name to steal the equity out of the home his mother and I built together. He committed federal wire fraud and felony identity theft against his own father. The sheer audacity of his crime was staggering. He did not just forge a simple check. He orchestrated a complex financial scheme to drain the lifeblood of my home. The dizziness I felt earlier from the spiked tea was absolutely nothing compared to the sickening, violent spin of this ultimate betrayal." I remembered the text message I saw flashing on Courtney's phone screen just hours ago. The loan sharks. Javon was so desperate to pay off his underworld debts that he put my home on the line. He traded the roof over my head to save his own miserable neck. He completely sold me out without a second thought of where I would live if the bank foreclosed. The boy I had sacrificed my entire youth, for the boy I shielded from the harsh realities of this world, had morphed into a greedy parasite. I sat back in the heavy leather chair, letting the heavy silence stretch across the room, processing the death of my son in my heart. For decades, I foolishly believed that providing everything I never had would automatically make Javon a better man. I wore worn-out work boots for years so he could wear brand-new sneakers to school. I drove a beat-up truck with a failing transmission so he could have a pristine sedan for his college graduation. I kept my immense wealth hidden in blind trusts and corporate structures because I wanted him to build his own legacy without relying on my shadow or becoming a spoiled trust fund kid expecting handouts. I wanted him to know the value of a hard-earned dollar. But my silent sacrifices did not build character or resilience. They only bred intense entitlement and greed. I fed a snake, and now it was trying to swallow me whole. Harrington watched me carefully, waiting for the inevitable explosion. He had seen me ruthlessly dismantle rival developers in hostile boardrooms, stripping them of their assets with cold precision. He knew exactly what I was capable of when crossed. "Should I initiate the commercial eviction proceedings for the boutique today?" he asked, pulling a legal pad closer. "And we need to contact the federal authorities immediately regarding the forged mortgage documents. We can have Javon arrested by tonight for wire fraud." "Number one," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble that commanded the room. "Do not collect a single dime of that back rent yet. Do not alert the bank or the police about the forgery. Not yet." Harrington paused, his pen hovering in the air. "Deacon, if we do not report the fraud immediately, you are legally liable for the massive debt." "I am liable for nothing because they are going to pay for every single sin," I replied, staring out the wide window at the sprawling city I helped build. "If we strike now, they will just scramble and lie their way out of it, finding some legal loophole. They think I am a weak, sedated old fool ready for the nursing home. Let them keep thinking exactly that. I want you to prepare all the eviction papers and the fraud reports, but hold them in your vault. We are going to weave a legal and financial net so incredibly tight they will suffocate the very moment they realize they are caught. Let them get comfortable in their deceit. Let them think they have completely won the game. I want to crush them absolutely and totally." Harrington slowly put his pen down and nodded deeply, understanding the ruthless strategy I was deploying. He reached into the very back of the thick folder and pulled out one final sheet of paper, sliding it carefully toward me. "There is one more thing you urgently need to see, Deacon." I tracked the digital movement of the $200,000 after it hit Javon and Courtney's joint account. I assumed they used it to pay off whatever dangerous debt they owe, or to keep the failing boutique afloat. I looked down at the banking routing numbers highlighted in bright yellow ink. They did not pay off a debt. I asked, my eyes narrowing into slits. "No." Harrington replied, his expression dead serious and grim. "Javon wired the entire $200,000 to a domestic shell company within 24 hours of receiving the fraudulent loan. I pulled the corporate registry for this specific shell company. It is a financial front for a commercial real estate zoning consultant, a man named Rick." Hearing that specific name sent a violent shockwave through my mind. Why would my son wire a fortune in stolen money to a zoning consultant instead of the violent loan sharks hunting him? Harrington leaned forward, pushing the document closer to my hands. "Because Rick is not just a consultant, Deacon. He specializes in hostile property takeovers and neighborhood gentrification blocks. Your son did not just steal your equity to pay a debt. He is actively paying a corporate shark to rezone and demolish your entire neighborhood. And worst of all, Rick is the exact same white man I saw having intimate drinks with Courtney 3 days ago. The stench of cheap entitlement and expensive Chardonnay hit me the moment I opened my own front door. Courtney had transformed my living room into a country club mixer for her pretentious friends. A dozen wealthy white socialites stood on my Persian rugs, laughing loudly and spilling wine over the furniture I had bought with decades of hard labor. Javon was nowhere to be seen. He was probably out running errands for her like an obedient lapdog. I walked in wearing my faded flannel shirt, carrying a small brown paper bag of groceries from the corner market. Courtney spotted me immediately. Her fake smile vanished, replaced by a scowl of sheer annoyance. She marched over her expensive heels, clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. "Deacon, take these to the kitchen immediately," she ordered, shoving a silver tray of sticky, dirty wine glasses directly into my chest. "And make sure you scrub the baseboards while you are in there. My guests do not need to see your mess." She did not ask politely. She commanded. She spoke to me not as her father-in-law, but as the hired help in a house I owned free and clear. I looked at the tray, then at her arrogant face. I did not argue. I simply nodded, taking the glasses and retreating to the kitchen. Let her play the queen in a castle she was about to lose. I set the tray on this granite counter and stood perfectly still by the swinging kitchen door. The wood was thin enough for me to hear every single word echoing from the living room. Courtney was holding court, soaking up the attention of her sycophantic friends. One of the women asked how she could bear living in such a rundown neighborhood. Courtney let out a sharp, cruel laugh that made my blood boil. "Oh, we are not staying in this ghetto for long," she announced, her voice carrying clearly over the soft jazz music playing in the background. "Javon finally secured the capital we need. We are going to bulldoze this entire block and build high-end retail spaces." Another guest gasped in fake sympathy. "But what about Javon's father? Where will the poor old man go?" Courtney scoffed, taking a loud sip of her wine. "Who cares about him? He is losing his mind anyway. We are shipping him off to a state-run hospice facility next month. He will be locked away with the rest of the crazy people. He does not even know what day it is half the time." The sheer malice in her voice was sickening, but she was not finished. She leaned in, lowering her voice just a fraction, but not enough to hide her venom. "Honestly, marrying Javon was a massive sacrifice. Dealing with his family and this entire African-American heritage nonsense is exhausting. They hold on to these outdated roots like it makes them special. It is pathetic. I am doing this city a favor by wiping his legacy off the map. Javon is too weak and too stupid to do what needs to be done, so I am handling it. I am taking the equity out of this miserable black-owned dirt and turning it into something actually valuable." The racist vitriol dripped from her tongue like concentrated acid. She absolutely despised my son. She despised my bloodline. She saw us as nothing more than primitive stepping stones for her own financial elevation. I stood in the deep shadows of my own kitchen, listening to the woman who was supposed to be the mother of my grandson strip away my humanity for the amusement of her country club friends. She was not just plotting financial ruin. She was trying to erase my existence entirely. She viewed my lifetime of struggles, my achievements, and my very identity as a stain she needed to bleach away. My hands gripped the edge of the granite counter so hard my knuckles turned white. She laughed again, mocking the way I walked, the clothes I wore, and the food I cooked. She bragged about manipulating the property documents right under my nose. She was freely handing me a complete verbal confession of her sinister intentions. A loud crash interrupted her racist monologue. One of her drunken guests had dropped a crystal wine glass, shattering it across my vintage oak floorboards. Courtney shrieked in absolute annoyance. "Deacon," she yelled, clapping her hands together like she was summoning a stray dog from the street. "Get out here and clean this up right now. Do not let anyone step on this glass." I walked out of the kitchen with a broom and a dustpan, my face an unreadable, emotionless mask. I knelt on the floor, surrounded by designer shoes and condescending stares. I picked up the larger shards with my bare hands. One piece was exceptionally sharp. I gripped it tightly in my palm, letting the sharp edge press deeply into my calloused skin until I felt a tiny, warm drop of blood form. The sudden physical pain grounded me. It kept the explosive rage inside my chest from erupting prematurely. I channeled every ounce of my fury into that single shard of glass, crushing it into submission. With my other hand, I reached deep into the pocket of my flannel shirt. I brushed my thumb against the small metallic rectangle I had purchased just hours ago from a specialized surveillance shop downtown. I firmly pressed the record button on the micro-audio device. A tiny vibration confirmed it was active and rolling. I remained kneeling on the floor, meticulously sweeping up the dust while the device captured every single sound in that room. It recorded the clinking of their glasses. It recorded their mocking laughter. And most importantly, it captured Courtney continuing to boast about her illegal real estate plans and her disgusting, prejudiced remarks. She had no idea she was speaking directly into a federal evidence file. She was handing me the exact ammunition I needed to destroy her character in a court of law and guarantee she would never see my grandson again. The heavy front door opened again, bringing a gust of evening wind into the house. A late guest stepped inside. He was tall, wearing a tailored charcoal suit, with slicked back hair and a confident, predatory swagger. Courtney immediately abandoned her circle of friends and practically ran toward him. Her entire demeanor changed from an arrogant host to a desperate schoolgirl. She grabbed his arm and quickly pulled him away from the main crowd, dragging him into the hidden alcove just behind the kitchen pantry. They thought they were completely out of sight. They were completely wrong. I stood up silently, placing the dustpan on the counter, and stepped into the deep shadow of the hallway. I watched them through the narrow gap between the pantry door and the wall. The man did not just say hello. He grabbed Courtney by the waist, pulling her body hard against his. She wrapped her arms around his neck and they engaged in a deep, hungry, passionate kiss. It was an embrace fueled by pure greed and forbidden lust. I slowly pulled my smartphone from my pocket, ensuring the flash was turned off. I raised the lens and snapped 3 clear, high-resolution photographs of their intertwined faces. I zoomed in on the glowing screen to inspect the image. The man kissing my daughter-in-law in my own house was not a stranger. It was Rick, the exact same corporate zoning consultant Javon had wired $200,000 to. The very next morning, I sat in a dimly lit diner across town, sliding a manila envelope across the sticky table. The man sitting opposite me was Elias, a former police detective turned private investigator whom I had kept on a lucrative retainer for my corporate dealings. Elias pulled out the glossy photographs I had printed of the passionate kitchen embrace. He did not even need a second to identify the man. He tapped a thick finger directly on the smirking face. "That is Rick," Elias said, his voice a low, gravelly hum. "He is the biggest vulture in the city. He operates a dozen shell companies and runs dirty zoning plays. He targets marginalized neighborhoods, bribes city planners, and forces out generational homeowners to build soulless commercial properties." I leaned back in the vinyl booth, letting the information settle. Rick was the exact zoning consultant Javon had wired $200,000 of my stolen equity to. My son thought he was paying a professional to help him develop the land. Instead, he was handing a loaded gun directly to his wife's lover. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the micro-audio device I had activated during Courtney's racist wine party. I handed Elias an earpiece and put the other in my own ear. I pressed play. The recording had captured more than just their sickening kiss. After the initial embrace, Rick and Courtney had lingered in the shadows of my pantry, whispering their grand design. Rick's voice came through crisp and predatory. "Did the idiot sign the final wire transfer yet?" Courtney let out a soft, cruel giggle. "Javon signed it yesterday. He was shaking like a leaf. He actually thinks this zoning project will make him a millionaire and get those loan sharks off his back. He is completely clueless. He is so desperate to maintain this fake wealthy lifestyle that he does not even read the contracts anymore." Rick chuckled a deep, sinister sound. "Good. The shell company received the $200,000. Once we get the deed to the old man's house and evict the rest of the block, the commercial buyers are ready to pay $8 million for the unified lot." "But what if the fraud gets traced back?" Courtney asked, a hint of fake concern in her voice. "That is the beauty of it," Rick replied smoothly. "Javon forged the mortgage. Javon wired the money. Javon's signature is on every single illegal document. When the federal agents inevitably figure out what happened, they will follow the paper trail straight to your husband. He will take the fall for the forgery, the wire fraud, and the elder abuse. He will go to federal prison for 20 years. By the time they arrest him, you will have already filed for divorce citing his criminal activity. The assets will be liquidated through the LLC, and we will be sitting on a beach in the south of France." Listening to this audio in the cold light of day, the sheer magnitude of their betrayal was breathtaking. My son had sold his soul, his father, and his heritage to please a woman who was actively setting him up for a lengthy federal prison sentence. Courtney did not just hate me. She hated the man she married. She was using Javon's desperate need for validation and his crippling underworld debt to manipulate him into committing felonies. She was orchestrating a flawless legal frame job. I watched Elias remove the earpiece, his professional stoicism replaced by genuine disgust. "They are setting your boy up for a massive fall, Deacon." Elias stated the obvious. "They are going to drain the property values, leave Javon holding the bag for multiple federal crimes, and disappear with millions." My chest felt tight, not from sorrow, but from a suffocating, intense anger. My son was a traitor to his own blood, but he was also a pathetic pawn in a game he did not even realize he was playing. I stared at my cold black coffee, processing the harsh reality. Javon was a fool. A greedy, blind fool who had rejected the honest life I tried to teach him, opting instead for quick cash and the approval of a woman who viewed him as entirely disposable. He had dug his own grave and handed Courtney the shovel. But Courtney and Rick had made one fatal miscalculation. They believed they were playing against a senile old man who was completely ignorant of corporate warfare. They did not know they had just entered a blood feud with a man who commanded more wealth and legal power than they could ever dream of. I built my empire by outsmarting men exactly like Rick. I knew every dirty zoning trick, every illegal kickback scheme, and every backdoor real estate maneuver in this city. I looked at Elias, my jaw set like granite. I want you to tear Rick's entire life apart. I ordered, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. Dig into every shell company, every offshore account, every bribe he has ever paid to a city official. Men like him always leave a paper trail of dirty money. I want his tax records. I want his offshore wire transfers. Find every single tax evasion scheme he has run for the last decade. We are not just going to stop them from stealing my house. We are going to hand Rick over to the IRS and the FBI on a silver platter. Elias nodded, pulling out a small notepad. I will get my forensic accountants on it immediately. If he is hiding money from the federal government, we will find it. Do not hold back, Elias, I said, sliding a thick stack of cash across the table to cover his immediate expenses. I want financial ruin. I want them stripped of everything they value. I left the diner feeling a dark sense of purpose. The trap was set, and I was ready to watch them hang themselves. I spent the rest of the day in my home office organizing my own legitimate financial documents, preparing to execute the legal strikes Harrington was holding in his vault. But at precisely 4:00 in the afternoon, my secure phone rang. It was Elias. His voice was no longer the calm, steady hum from the diner. It was tight, urgent, and laced with real alarm. "Deacon, you need to listen to me very carefully," he said, skipping any pleasantries. I started digging into Courtney's recent financial activity just to cover all our bases. I found something terrifying. I gripped the phone, my instincts flaring. "What did she do?" I asked. "She just finalized a transaction this morning," Elias replied, his breath hitching slightly. "Courtney used a portion of the stolen loan money to purchase a massive life insurance policy. It is a comprehensive accidental death plan. The payout is a flat $1 million, and Deacon, the policy is not on her. She took it out on Javon." A sickening chill washed over my entire body, paralyzing my lungs. The loan sharks, the forged documents, the setup, it all suddenly morphed into something infinitely more sinister. Courtney and Rick were not just planning to send my son to federal prison. They were actively planning to put him in a body bag. The terrifying revelation of the life insurance policy was still echoing in my mind when the front doorbell rang. It was Friday afternoon. Javon stood on the porch looking exhausted and jittery, practically shoving my 8-year-old grandson Leo through the door. Javon did not even step inside. He just muttered something about a business meeting and sped off in his car, leaving a trail of exhaust fumes. I pushed my son's impending doom to the back of my mind and focused on the only pure thing left in my lineage. Leo walked into the hallway, keeping his head down. He was unusually quiet. Normally, he would run to the kitchen asking for my homemade cookies, but today he moved stiffly. "Let me take your jacket, little man," I said, reaching out. As I pulled the left sleeve down, Leo let out a sharp gasp and flinched, pulling his arm away from me. My instincts instantly kicked in. I knelt down to his eye level. "Show me your arm, Leo," I commanded gently but firmly. He hesitated, his small hands trembling. Slowly, he rolled up the sleeve of his flannel shirt. My heart stopped. Right there on his upper forearm was a massive dark purple bruise. It was not a scrape from playing at the park. It was the undeniable shape of an adult hand. Someone had grabbed him with brutal, vicious force. I stared at the dark marks on his brown skin, feeling a volcanic rage building in my chest. "Who did this to you, Leo?" I asked, keeping my voice as calm and steady as humanly possible, so I would not frighten him further. Tears welled up in his large brown eyes. He looked at his sneakers, refusing to meet my gaze. "I fell off my bike, Grandpa," he whispered, repeating a lie he had clearly been forced to memorize. I gently cupped his chin, lifting his face to look at me. "A man is only as good as his truth, Leo," I told him. "You are safe in this house. No one will ever hurt you here. I promise you that." "Who did this?" The dam finally broke. Leo began to sob uncontrollably, his small shoulders shaking with the weight of a secret too heavy for an 8-year-old boy to carry. "It was Mom," he cried, burying his face into my chest. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him tightly, while a cold, lethal hatred for Courtney crystallized in my soul. "Why did she grab you like that?" I asked softly, stroking his back. Because of my school project, he choked out between sobs. "My teacher asked us what we wanted to be when we grew up. I drew a picture of you, Grandpa. I told Mom I wanted to be a strong, hard-working man just like you. I told her I was proud to be like you. He wiped his nose with the back of his hand, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "She got so mad, Grandpa. She yelled at me. She grabbed my arm and squeezed it so hard it burned. She told me I should never want to be like you. She said my skin and my blood were a curse and that I needed to act better than the people I came from. She told me I was half of a mistake, and she was going to scrub the ghetto out of me if it was the last thing she did." Every word out of his mouth was a dagger to my heart and gasoline on the fire of my wrath. Courtney was not just a greedy thief trying to steal my property. She was a racist monster actively abusing my grandson, trying to break his spirit and make him hate his own heritage. She hated the black blood running through his veins. She was physically and psychologically torturing an innocent child because she despised the family she married into. Javon was too weak and blind to protect his own son, leaving this boy at the mercy of a predator. I held Leo closer, resting my chin on top of his head. "Do not ever listen to her, Leo," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "You come from kings. You come from survivors. You are brilliant and strong, and there is nothing wrong with who you are. Do you understand me?" He nodded slowly, his crying subsiding as the safety of my embrace calmed his fears. "I am going to make sure she never hurts you again," I promised, "and when Deacon Wright makes a promise, the earth itself will move to fulfill it." I led Leo to the kitchen and sat him down at the table with a glass of juice and a plate of cookies. While he ate, I pulled out my smartphone. "I need to take a few pictures of your arm, Leo, just to show the doctor later," I explained, keeping my tone light. He nodded, eating his cookie. I took multiple high-resolution photos of the bruising from different angles, ensuring the handprint was clearly visible under the bright kitchen lights. "I will be there in 20 minutes, Deacon," he replied. While I waited, I uploaded the photographs of Leo's arm to my secure cloud server. This was no longer just about protecting my wealth or punishing a fraudulent daughter-in-law. This was a war for the survival and soul of my grandson. Courtney wanted to scrub my legacy away. I was going to scrub her entirely out of existence. As soon as Dr. Thorne arrived and began his gentle examination of Leo, I stepped back into my office and picked up the phone again. This time I called Harrington. My attorney answered on the first ring. "Deacon, what is the status?" Harrington asked. "The status has completely changed," I growled, my voice vibrating with a cold, terrifying authority. "Courtney put her hands on my grandson. She physically assaulted him because of his race. I just had it medically documented." Harrington's breath hitched over the line. He knew exactly what that meant. "I want you to draft the emergency petitions for the immediate termination of parental rights for both Courtney and Javon," I ordered. "I want full permanent custody of Leo. Use the forged mortgage documents, use the wire fraud, use the audio recordings of her affair with Rick, and now add child abuse to the list. Compile everything into a single devastating legal strike. We are no longer waiting for them to make another move. We are no longer playing defense. I want their entire world dismantled piece by piece. I want them stripped of their freedom, their money, and their child." "Prepare the execution papers, Harrington. The defensive game is over. The slaughter begins now." It was Monday morning, just a few days before the Thanksgiving holiday, when Javon walked through my front door with a stranger trailing closely behind him. The man wore a cheap, wrinkled suit and carried a scuffed leather briefcase, trying desperately to project the aura of a respected medical professional. I was sitting quietly at the dining room table, reading the morning financial paper and drinking my freshly brewed tea. Javon did not bother to greet me. He did not ask how I was feeling. He just pulled out a heavy wooden chair and aggressively patted the surface, signaling the strange man to sit directly across from me. "Dad, this is Dr. Miller," Javon announced, his voice tight with a frantic, nervous energy. "He is here to do a quick evaluation, just a routine checkup to make sure your mind is keeping up with your age. Courtney insists we get this done today." I folded my newspaper slowly, deliberately assessing the situation. This was the shady doctor Javon had bragged about, the one they had bribed to build a bulletproof case for my institutionalization. Dr. Miller did not even bother unpacking a stethoscope or checking my vitals. He simply pulled out a thick stack of printed cognitive tests, placing them squarely in front of my face. "We are going to do a few simple exercises, Mr. Wright," the man said with a condescending smirk. "Just follow my instructions." The time had come to give my greedy son and his hired crook the exact performance they were paying for. I let my shoulders slouch heavily, rounding my back to look exceedingly frail and defeated. I forced my hands to shake slightly, a subtle, continuous tremor that rattled the porcelain teacup when I reached for it. I looked at Dr. Miller with wide, vacant eyes, blinking slowly as if trying to process his simple words through a thick, impenetrable fog. "Let us start with something exceptionally easy," the doctor said, clicking his ballpoint pen loudly. "Can you tell me what year it is, and who the current president is?" I stared blankly at the floral wallpaper behind his head. I opened my mouth, then closed it, stammering like a lost child. "It is 1998. I murmured, my voice cracking perfectly. "Clinton is in the White House right now. My beautiful wife is just upstairs. She will be down to cook dinner for us very soon." My wife had passed away over a decade ago. Javon shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but I caught the unmistakable glint of cruel triumph flashing in his dark eyes. He leaned over the table and whispered loudly to the fake doctor, ensuring I could hear him. "He has been like this all week, Doc. He is completely slipping away from us." The fraudulent doctor nodded gravely, making a swift, dramatic checkmark on his clipboard. He then placed a blank piece of paper in front of me along with his pen. "Please draw the hands on a clock to show 10 past 11, he instructed, speaking to me as if I were a toddler. I picked up the pen, letting my grip slip so my hold looked awkward and uncoordinated. I drew a jagged, messy scribble that vaguely resembled a circle, placing the numbers completely out of order and drawing the hands pointing to random, nonsensical directions. I slid the paper back to him with a confused, helpless smile. "Is that right, son?" I asked, looking directly at Javon. "Are we going to the auto shop now, Michael?" I purposefully called him by his older cousin's name. Javon actually smiled a genuine, wicked smile of victory. That was all the confirmation Dr. Miller needed. He did not ask any more questions. He did not conduct a single physical exam. He simply pulled a pre-written certificate of mental incompetence from his briefcase and signed his name at the bottom with a theatrical flourish. "Based on this severe cognitive decline, your father is entirely unfit to make any financial or medical decisions for himself," Dr. Miller declared, sliding the certified document toward Javon. "You have my full medical authorization to assume total control over his estate." Javon snatched the document like a starving dog grabbing a fresh bone. He immediately reached into his own jacket and slammed a massive legal packet onto the dining table right in front of me. It was a comprehensive general power of attorney contract. It explicitly surrendered my rights to my property, my bank accounts, and my medical directives, handing total absolute control directly to Javon. "Just sign here, Dad," Javon said, pointing eagerly to the dotted line at the very bottom of the last page. "It is just some insurance paperwork to make sure you are taken care of." I stared down at the thick legal document sitting ominously on my dining table. This piece of paper was their golden ticket. This was the magic wand Courtney and Javon desperately needed to bulldoze my home, sell the land to Rick, and secure their escape to a life of unearned luxury. They thought they had finally backed me into a corner. They truly believed my supposed dementia made me an easy target. I picked up the pen, my hand continuing its engineered tremor with absolute precision. I looked up at Javon, giving him one final opportunity to pull back from the point of no return. "Are you absolutely sure about this, son?" I asked, my voice a raspy, fragile whisper. "Are you sure this is the right thing to do?" Javon did not hesitate for a single second. His eyes were cold, ruthless, and entirely impatient. "Just sign the paper, Dad. It is for the best. I promise." I lowered my head and pressed the tip of the pen against the dotted line. I began to write. But I did not write my actual signature. For 40 years, my legal signature on every bank account, corporate filing, and commercial real estate deed was a very specific, sharp cursive flow with a distinct loop on the D and a sharp, rigid underline beneath the W. It was a signature heavily registered and strictly verified by central banking authorities and federal property databases across the state. Instead, I wrote a blocky, slow, childish scrawl. I misspelled my own middle name. I made the cursive letters completely inconsistent with any legal document I had ever signed in my entire adult life. I carefully crafted a signature that any basic bank teller or real estate clerk would immediately flag as fraudulent upon verification. To the untrained, desperate eyes of my greedy son, it looked like the shaky, authentic signature of a rapidly deteriorating old man. In reality, it was a legally binding self-destruct button. The document he was holding was absolute garbage. It held zero legal weight and would trigger massive fraud alerts if used. But Javon did not know that. He ripped the signed contract out from under my pen the moment the ink was dry. He clutched the papers to his chest as if he had just won the state lottery. Dr. Miller hastily packed up his battered briefcase and practically sprinted out the front door, eager to cash whatever dirty check my son had promised him. Javon did not even wait for the doctor's car to leave the driveway before pulling out his smartphone. He dialed a number, his fingers shaking violently with adrenaline and greed. He paced back and forth in the center of the living room, completely ignoring my presence, assuming I was too lost in my dementia to understand a single word he was saying. "Yeah, it is me," Javon said, his voice dripping with arrogant confidence. "I got it. I have the signed power of attorney and the medical certificate. The house is officially mine to leverage. Tell your boss the money is secured." I listened carefully from the dining table, my face perfectly blank while my mind processed the dangerous conversation. The voice on the other end of the line was loud, aggressive, and entirely unforgiving. Javon flinched slightly but held his ground. "I told you I have the deed," he snapped back, sweating profusely. "Just give me until tonight. Come to the house at 8 o'clock sharp. I will hand over the property rights to clear the debt completely. Just call off your guys." Javon hung up the phone, letting out a massive sigh of relief. He looked around the house, running his hands along the walls as if he had already sold them to the highest bidder. He thought he had outsmarted me. He had just invited ruthless loan sharks to my doorstep tonight to collect on a deed that was protected by a fraudulent, useless signature. The heavy, antique grandfather clock in the hallway chimed exactly 8 times. I sat in my favorite leather armchair, waiting with absolute stillness. Javon was pacing frantically near the front window, sweating through his expensive designer shirt, checking his phone every 5 seconds. He thought he was about to trade my life and my home for his own personal freedom. He did not realize he was just the bait swinging helplessly on a very sharp hook. The sound of shattering glass suddenly tore through the quiet evening. The heavy front door was kicked open with such violent force that the brass hinges splintered and the wood cracked. 3 massive, menacing men stepped into my home, crushing the broken glass under their heavy work boots. The leader was a towering man with a thick, jagged scar across his jaw. He locked his cold, dead eyes directly on my son. Javon let out a high-pitched shriek of pure, absolute terror. All his arrogant swagger from earlier completely vanished in an instant. Instead of standing his ground and protecting his childhood home or defending his elderly father, he did the unthinkable. He grabbed my shoulders from behind, shoving me forcefully into the center of the living room to act as his physical human shield. Before I could even brace my footing, Javon sprinted down the hallway, darted into the guest bedroom, and slammed the solid oak door, locking it tight. He left his 69-year-old father alone to face a crew of ruthless underworld enforcers. I did not stumble. I did not show a single ounce of fear or intimidation. I simply adjusted the cuffs of my wool sweater and stared directly into the eyes of the violent men who had come to collect a blood debt. The leader stepped forward, pulling a heavy steel wrench from inside his dark leather jacket. "Where is the punk?" he demanded, his voice a deep, menacing growl that vibrated through the floorboards. "He promised us a deed tonight. If he thinks a locked door is going to stop me from breaking his legs and tearing this place apart, he is completely mistaken." I slowly walked back to my leather armchair and took a seat, projecting the absolute, unshakable authority of a man who owned the very ground they stood on. "My son is a coward," I stated calmly, crossing my legs and resting my hands on my lap. "But more importantly, my son is a liar. He does not have the deed to this house. The power of attorney document he signed today is entirely fraudulent and legally void. He is playing you for a fool." The scarred man tightened his grip on the steel wrench, stepping aggressively into my personal space. "And why should I believe a crazy old man? Because the crazy old man knows exactly where your money is," I replied without missing a single beat. I reached into the inner pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a neatly folded document. It was a flawless counterfeit bank statement expertly crafted earlier that afternoon by Elias, my private investigator. I tossed the paper onto the coffee table right in front of the enforcer. The crisp white paper landed next to a stack of old magazines, a stark contrast to the impending violence in the room. "Read it yourself," I commanded, leaning back and resting my hands on the armrests. The man narrowed his eyes, snatching the paper from the table. As his eyes scanned the highlighted financial figures, his expression shifted from violent aggression to absolute sheer outrage. The document detailed a hidden offshore account in the Cayman Islands registered under a highly secure domestic shell company. The balance was a staggering $500,000. Javon has been hiding that money for months. I explained, my voice steady and highly persuasive. He and his white wife are quietly liquidating every asset they can touch. They plan to leave the country and move to the south of France by the end of the week. He invited you here tonight to hand you a fake deed, hoping it would buy him enough time to get on a private plane. He is leaving you with worthless paper while he walks away with $500,000 of clean cash. The leader crumpled the fake bank statement in his massive fist. The thick veins in his neck bulged as the reality of the supposed disrespect washed over his mind. A pathetic suburban punk was actively trying to scam a seasoned street boss out of a small fortune. I am going to rip his head off. The man growled, turning his furious, murderous gaze toward the locked bedroom door. He took a heavy, deliberate step forward, raising the steel wrench. I raised my hand, keeping my posture completely relaxed, stopping him dead in his tracks. "If you break that door down and kill him tonight, you get absolutely nothing," I said, my tone sharp, pragmatic, and dripping with business logic. "The police will swarm this neighborhood within minutes of the noise. You will have a first-degree murder charge, a massive federal investigation on your hands, and you still will not have a single penny of your money. The offshore account requires his biometric signature to authorize a wire transfer. If he is dead, your money dies with him in that room." The man froze, his heavy chest heaving as he weighed his immediate options. He knew I was right. Street violence was loud, messy, and highly unprofitable. "What do you care, old man?" he sneered, pointing the wrench at me. "He is your son. He gave me up to save himself." I replied coldly, my voice lacking any paternal warmth. "I owe him nothing, but I am offering you a guaranteed collection, a highly profitable arrangement for both of us." The enforcer lowered his weapon slightly, listening closely to my proposal. "This Thursday is Thanksgiving." I continued my plan, unfolding flawlessly. "My son and his wife are hosting a holiday dinner right here in this house. They think they have completely won. They think they are flying to Europe on Friday morning. I want you to crash their perfect celebration. I want you to walk through that door when they are at their absolute most arrogant and vulnerable. I will ensure the offshore funds are completely unlocked and ready for transfer. You can take every single dime he owes you, plus whatever massive interest you deem fit." The man studied my face intensely, looking for any sign of deception, fear, or senility. He found neither. He only saw a ruthless patriarch cleaning his own house. "You are a cold man." He noted a twisted, amused smile forming on his scarred face. "But I like your style. We will be back on Thursday. If you are lying to me, we will burn this entire house to the ground with both of you inside it. I will leave the front door unlocked," I replied simply. The three men turned around and walked out of my house, stepping over the shattered glass of my front window. Their heavy boots faded into the dark night, followed by the aggressive roar of a powerful engine speeding away. The house fell completely silent once again. I remained in my armchair, staring at the broken glass littering my pristine hardwood floor. 5 agonizing minutes passed before the brass lock on the guest bedroom clicked. The heavy oak door cracked open just an inch. Javon peeked his head out, his eyes wide and panicked, darting wildly around the empty living room. Seeing that the dangerous mobsters were gone, he slowly stepped out, wiping the cold sweat from his forehead. He looked at the broken window and then at me. "Where are they?" he asked, his voice trembling with residual fear. "They took the power of attorney document and left." I lied smoothly, keeping my face perfectly blank and unreadable. "I told them you were finalizing the property transfer with the lawyers." Javon let out a massive breath of relief, slumping against the hallway wall. He actually believed his brilliant plan had worked perfectly. He actually thought a forged signature had saved him from a violent beating. A sickening, arrogant smile spread across his face. "I told you, Dad. I told you I had everything under control." He boasted, completely ignoring the fact that he had just used me as a human shield. "You have nothing to worry about anymore. We are going to finalize the medical facility transfer tomorrow morning. It is time for you to pack your bags." He turned his back on me and walked to the kitchen, whistling a cheerful tune. He thought he was preparing for a victory lap. He had no idea he had just blindly walked into a slaughterhouse. The sun had barely risen on Tuesday morning when I locked myself in my home office and picked up my secure phone. Javon was still asleep, dreaming of a European getaway that would never happen. I dialed the direct line to the chief financial officer of my property management group. The time for silent observation was officially over. I was shutting off the oxygen to their fake luxury lifestyle. Listen to me very carefully, I said, my voice a low command. I want a complete and immediate freeze on all corporate credit accounts linked to the commercial retail space on Fifth Avenue. Cancel the vendor guarantees and initiate the immediate revocation of the lease agreement for violation of payment terms. The CFO did not hesitate for a second. Consider it done, Mr. Wright. The accounts will be locked out system-wide in 5 minutes. I hung up the phone and stared at the quiet street outside my window. Courtney had built her entire socialite persona on the foundation of my hidden generosity. She thought she was a brilliant entrepreneur while she was actually living on my corporate life support. I just pulled the plug. Across town, in an exclusive designer boutique, Courtney was about to experience her first taste of absolute poverty. She stood at the marble checkout counter, flanked by her wealthy friends holding 2 luxury handbags that cost more than my first car. She nonchalantly handed her platinum corporate card to the cashier, expecting the usual sycophantic smile. Instead, the cashier swiped the card, frowned, and swiped it again. The machine beeped a loud, aggressive denial. "I am sorry, Mom," the cashier said, her tone dripping with sudden judgment. "Your card has been completely declined. The account is flagged and frozen by the issuing institution." Courtney's face flushed a deep, humiliating shade of crimson. Her friends exchanged quiet, mocking glances. She snatched the card back, her hands trembling with sheer embarrassment and fury. "There must be a glitch in your cheap system," she snapped, storming out of the store and immediately dialing her husband. Javon was pulling into the parking lot of my primary banking institution when his phone blared. He ignored Courtney's hysterical screaming about the declined credit card. He had bigger plans. He strutted into the massive marble lobby of the bank, clutching the fraudulent power of attorney document like a shield of invincibility. He bypassed the teller line and walked directly into the branch manager's office, dropping the heavy legal packet onto the mahogany desk. "I need to liquidate the primary checking and savings accounts belonging to Deacon Wright," Javon demanded, projecting the unearned confidence of a newly minted millionaire. "I am his son and his sole legally appointed guardian. My father has been declared mentally incompetent. Transfer the entire balance to my personal routing number immediately." The bank manager, a seasoned financial veteran with 30 years of experience, picked up the document and adjusted his glasses. He reviewed the medical certificate and scrutinized the signature on the power of attorney. He opened his computer terminal, pulling up my highly secure digital profile. The manager's professional demeanor instantly shifted into a mask of cold, hard suspicion. "Mr. Wright, I cannot process this request," the manager stated, pushing the document back across the desk. "This signature is a complete anomaly. It does not match the biometric and physical signatures your father has maintained with us for 4 decades. Furthermore, there is a federal security lock on all of his financial assets, explicitly prohibiting any third-party transfers without his physical presence and a verified passcode." Javon slammed his fist on the desk. "That document is legally binding. You are looking at a sick old man's handwriting. Do the transfer right now, or I will sue this bank into the ground." The manager stood up, pressing a button under his desk. "You will do no such thing. If you do not leave my office this exact second, I will have the armed guards arrest you for attempting to commit bank fraud with a forged legal document." Javon practically ran out of the bank, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned completely white. His breathing was shallow and frantic. The brilliant, flawless plan he had orchestrated with Courtney and Rick was violently unraveling right in front of his eyes. The commercial accounts were frozen, locking out his wife, who was currently blowing up his phone with hysterical text messages. The primary banking assets were heavily fortified by impenetrable security measures. The loan sharks were coming back on Thanksgiving for their blood money, and he had absolutely nothing to give them. He was completely locked out of every single financial avenue he thought he controlled. A sickening wave of primal panic washed over him. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had not outsmarted his senile father. The useless piece of paper sitting on his passenger seat was not a key to a fortune. It was a massive, blazing red flag. He slammed his foot on the gas pedal, tearing out of the bank parking lot and running a red light. He drove through the city streets like an absolute madman, dodging traffic and ignoring the blaring horns of other drivers. He needed to get home immediately. He needed to physically corner me and force me to unlock the accounts before the entire scheme collapsed. He would drag me down to the bank himself if he had to. He would threaten me, beg me, or violently shake the passcode out of my supposedly demented brain. He pulled into my driveway, skidding onto the manicured lawn and leaving deep, muddy tire tracks across the grass. He threw the car door open and sprinted up the porch steps, his face twisted in a mask of pure, desperate rage. He punched the passcode into the front door keypad and shoved it open. "Dad!" he screamed, his voice echoing off the hardwood floors. "Dad, where are you?" He stormed through the living room, throwing chairs aside and tearing through the kitchen. The house was completely silent. There was no kettle whistling on the stove. There was no old man sitting in the leather armchair. Javon charged down the hallway toward my master bedroom. He grabbed the brass doorknob, but it was locked from the inside. He did not hesitate. Fueled by sheer blind panic, he took a step back and kicked the solid wood door with all his might. The frame splintered and the door flew open, crashing loudly against the wall. Javon stumbled into the room, his eyes darting frantically. The bedroom was completely empty. The bed was meticulously made without a single wrinkle. My reading glasses were gone from the nightstand. My heavy winter coats were missing from the closet. But what made Javon's stomach drop completely into a bottomless abyss was the corner of the room. The heavy steel portrait of my late wife had been moved to the floor, revealing the massive wall safe hidden behind it. The thick metal door of the safe was swung wide open. It was entirely stripped clean. Every single stock certificate, every property deed, every stack of emergency cash, and every piece of identifying documentation had vanished. A single white piece of paper sat on the empty metal shelf. Javon walked over with trembling hands and picked it up. It read simply, "Gone for a walk." I had completely disappeared without a single trace, leaving him entirely alone to face the catastrophic storm I had just unleashed. While Javon was tearing my empty house apart looking for ghosts, I was sitting 40 stories above the city in the presidential suite of the Grand Monarch Hotel. The sprawling room with its floor-to-ceiling windows and imported Italian marble was a fortress of tranquility compared to the panic consuming my son. I sat at the head of a massive mahogany dining table. Across from me sat two senior agents from Child Protective Services. Their expressions were grave, their postures rigid with professional concern. They had come expecting to interview a concerned grandfather. They were about to receive a masterclass in total parental destruction. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water, taking my time, letting the silence command the room. I did not run from my home out of fear. I left to orchestrate a legal execution. "Mrs. Sterling," I said, addressing the lead investigator, "I brought you here today because my grandson Leo is in immediate mortal danger. His mother is a violent racist, and his father is a spineless accomplice who will let her do whatever she wants as long as it funds his fake lifestyle." I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. I slid it across the table toward the investigator. Inside are high-resolution photographs of defensive bruising on Leo's arms, along with a certified medical report from a highly respected pediatrician, Dr. Eris Thorne. The report details the physical trauma and outlines the severe psychological abuse my grandson has endured at the hands of his white mother. Courtney physically assaulted him because he dared to express pride in his African-American heritage. She told an 8-year-old boy that his blood was a mistake. Mrs. Sterling opened the file. Her professional composure slipped as she looked at the photographs of the dark purple handprint on Leo's small arm. Her jaw tightened and she exchanged a horrified look with her partner. "This is sickening, Mr. Wright," she said, her voice thick with disgust. "We have more than enough here to initiate an immediate emergency removal and file for a termination of parental rights. But custody battles can be protracted. We need to ensure Leo has a stable, secure environment that no high-priced defense attorney can challenge." I smiled, a cold, humorless smile. "Oh, I assure you finances will not be an issue." I turned to Harrington, who was sitting silently to my right. He opened his own briefcase and produced a stack of freshly drafted legal contracts bound in heavy cardstock. "Just an hour before you arrived, I executed the complete liquidation of my liquid commercial assets and private holdings. I announced placing a customized gold pen on top of the documents. I am officially transferring exactly $12 million into a heavily fortified, irrevocable blind trust. The sole exclusive beneficiary of this trust is my grandson, Leo Wright. He will not have access to the principal until he is 30 years old, ensuring he grows up grounded. Until then, the trust will fully fund his education, health care, and housing under the strict supervision of a court-appointed fiduciary." I signed the final page with my authentic, sharp cursive signature securing my legacy. As for my son Javon, I continued looking directly at Harrington. He is completely disinherited. I have drafted an ironclad addendum to my will specifically citing his attempts to defraud my estate and conspire against my well-being. He will not receive a single dime, a single piece of property, or a single memory from my estate. He is financially dead to me. The agents watched in stunned silence as I effortlessly moved millions of dollars to protect a child and permanently ruin a traitor. As the agents packed up their files and assured me the emergency custody orders would be expedited, Harrington slid one final folder in front of me. The cover was stark red, indicating highly sensitive corporate espionage. Elias came through Deacon. Harrington said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The private investigator cracked Rick's shell companies wide open. We have complete digital ledgers, offshore routing numbers, and a decade worth of falsified tax returns. Rick has been systematically defrauding the federal government of millions while using desperate idiots like Javon as his personal money mules. Javon wired that $200,000 straight into an account previously flagged by the IRS for money laundering. I opened the folder, reviewing the intricate web of financial deceit. Rick thought he was an untouchable corporate shark, but on paper he was a sloppy, arrogant thief, and Javon was tied directly to his sinking ship. Handing these documents over to the local police would be a waste of time. They would drag it out in local courts, and Rick would bail himself out. I wanted total, absolute annihilation. I looked at Harrington, my decision made. We do not go to the local authorities. I instructed, tapping the folder. We bypass them completely. Contact your associates at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Hand over every single ledger, every fake tax return, and the forged mortgage documents Javon signed. Give the feds the entire network on a silver platter. I want them both facing federal racketeering charges. I want their assets seized, their passports frozen, and their lives dismantled by the United States government. Harrington smirked, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the kill. I already made the call, Deacon. They are waiting in the adjoining suite. 2 federal agents walked into the dining room dressed in sharp suits and carrying the heavy authority of the federal government. They had been listening to the entire presentation. Special Agent Miller extended his hand. Mr. Wright, we have been trying to build a solid case against Rick for 3 years. The financial records your investigator procured are the exact missing link we needed, and your son's involvement gives us the perfect leverage to tear the whole operation down. We are ready to move. When do you want us to execute the warrants? I looked out the massive window at the city below, visualizing the exact layout of my dining room table. I visualized Courtney sneering at my heritage and Javon cowardly looking away. The timing had to be absolutely flawless. Tomorrow is Thanksgiving, I said, turning back to the agents with a predatory calmness. My son and his wife are hosting a beautiful, intimate holiday dinner at my house. They think they have won. They think they are sending me to a psychiatric ward and flying to Europe the very next morning. I want you to crash their perfect celebration. I want the raid to happen right in my living room, right when they think they are untouchable. The agents exchanged a look of professional approval and nodded. The trap was set. The ultimate betrayal was scheduled to be served perfectly on time. The silence of my empty house was violently shattered by the sound of breaking glass and hysterical screaming. I monitored their every move through the hidden security cameras I had installed weeks ago, watching the live high-definition feed from the comfort of my hotel suite. Javon was pacing like a caged, trapped animal in the center of the living room. Courtney hurled a heavy crystal decorative bowl against the brick fireplace, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. Every single card is declined, she shrieked violently, stabbing her manicured fingers into her smartphone screen. The corporate cards, the personal accounts, even the emergency backups. The bank says there is a federal block on our entire portfolio. We cannot even buy a tank of gas, let alone 2 first-class plane tickets to Paris. Javon ripped at his hair, his tailored suit wrinkled and stained with nervous sweat. We need to leave tonight, Courtney. The loan sharks are coming back tomorrow, and I gave them a completely fake deed. If we do not get on a plane, we are dead. They scrambled desperately through their expensive luggage, trying to book flights on sketchy third-party websites, but every transaction flashed the exact same brutal message: insufficient funds. The luxury life they thought they stole had evaporated into thin air. As their panic reached a boiling point, my untraceable burner phone sat on the marble table in front of me. The time had come to reel my traitorous son back in. I dialed the landline to my house, knowing they were both hovering frantically near it. The phone rang, cutting through their screaming match like a sharp knife. Javon lunged for the receiver, answering with breathless desperation. "Hello. Who is this?" I let out a long, trembling exhale, leaning close to the microphone. I made my voice sound incredibly frail, hollow, and completely lost. "Javon," I murmured, injecting a thick layer of pharmaceutical-induced confusion into my tone. "Javon, is that you? Where am I?" "It is so cold out here." The relief on Javon's face was instantaneous and entirely sickening. He covered the receiver and frantically mouthed to his wife that it was me. "Dad! Dad, where did you go?" He yelled, his voice shifting instantly into the fake, compassionate tone of a deeply concerned son. "You terrified us. We have been looking everywhere for you. Please tell me where you are." I let a few seconds of dead air pass, making him sweat just a little bit more. "I do not know, son." I whimpered, perfectly executing the role of a dementia-riddled old man. "I was looking for the post office to pick up my paycheck, but the streets look all wrong. I am sitting on a freezing metal bench. There is a broken street lamp and a big neon sign for a diner. I think it is the old neighborhood. Stay right there, Dad. Do not move a single muscle." Javon commanded, practically jumping out of his skin with eager anticipation. "I am coming to get you right now. I love you, Dad. You are going to be safe." He slammed the phone down and turned to Courtney, his eyes wide with a manic, greedy light. He is completely out of his mind. He thinks he is still working at the post office. Javon laughed a harsh, desperate sound. "This is perfect. We get him back inside the house, lock the doors, and force him to authorize the bank transfer manually tomorrow morning. We can still salvage this." Javon grabbed his car keys and sprinted out the front door, leaving Courtney to continue her frantic, useless attempts to bypass the frozen credit lines. I hung up the burner phone and stood up from the hotel dining table. I adjusted my heavy winter coat and hailed a cab, giving the driver the intersection in the rundown neighborhood I had just described to my son. I arrived 10 minutes before he did, sitting on the freezing metal bench, letting the cold night air sharpen my absolute resolve. Javon's luxury sedan screeched to a halt at the curb just a few feet from the rusted bus stop. He threw the car into park and leaped out, rushing toward me with an exaggerated expression of absolute relief. "Dad, thank God I found you," he cried, wrapping his arms around my shoulders in a stiff, unnatural hug. "You cannot just wander off like that. Your mind is playing severe tricks on you." I let him guide me to the passenger seat, moving with a slow, deliberate shuffle. As he buckled my seatbelt, I looked at his face, studying the profound depths of his endless hypocrisy. We drove through the dark city streets, the heater blasting against the freezing night. I rested my head against the window, keeping my voice weak and raspy. "I am sorry, Javon," I whispered. "I just wanted to make sure the house was secure. You know how hard your mother and I worked for that house. It is the only thing I have left to leave you and Leo. I just want to protect our family." Javon tightened his grip on the steering wheel, never taking his eyes off the road. "Do not worry about the house, Dad," he lied effortlessly, his voice dripping with false reassurance. "Courtney and I are taking care of everything. We are protecting your legacy. You just need to rest and let us handle the finances. We would never let anyone take what is yours." Hearing him speak those words, knowing he had literally forged my signature to sell my home to a corporate shark, extinguished the very last microscopic ember of paternal mercy burning in my chest. He was not a victim of circumstance. He was not acting out of momentary panic. He was a calculated, remorseless predator. I closed my eyes, letting my breathing slow to a deep rhythmic pattern, feigning a heavy, exhausted sleep. Assuming I was completely unconscious and lost in a deep, sedated slumber, Javon reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his smartphone. He dialed a number, keeping the phone pressed tightly to his ear, and his voice dropped to a harsh, hushed whisper. "Yes, this is Javon Wright," he muttered, glancing quickly at my supposedly sleeping face to ensure I had not stirred. "I am calling to confirm the medical transport for tomorrow morning. Yes, the Thanksgiving holiday. I do not care what day it is on the calendar. The patient is completely unstable and needs to be removed from the premises by 9:00 sharp. Send the heavy-duty orderlies. He is going to be extremely combative, and we need him strapped down and transported to the permanent lockdown ward without any delays." He paused, listening to the dispatcher on the other end of the line. "Yes, I have the signed medical authorization and the power of attorney. Just bring the straitjacket and get him out of my sight permanently." Javon ended the call, dropping the phone into the center console with a deeply satisfied sigh. He actually believed he had secured his ultimate victory. He thought tomorrow morning would bring an ambulance to carry away his final obstacle, allowing him to drain my accounts and flee the country. He had absolutely no idea that the only vehicles pulling up to our house tomorrow would be armored federal transport vans, and that the only person leaving the premises in heavy steel restraints would be him. Thanksgiving morning arrived with a bitter chill in the air. I sat quietly in my leather armchair watching the absurd theater unfolding in my own dining room. Courtney was frantically staging a massive, lavish feast that nobody was actually going to eat. She had ordered expensive catered food, arranging perfectly roasted turkey cranberries and elaborate centerpieces on my grandmother's vintage table. She was completely manic, directing Javon to adjust the lighting and fluff the napkins. This entire ridiculous display was strictly for her social media followers. She was manufacturing a digital illusion of a perfect happy family holiday right before she planned to ship me off to a psychiatric ward and flee the country with stolen millions. She posed next to the roasted turkey, flashing a brilliant, blinding smile at her smartphone camera, capturing a hollow snapshot of domestic bliss. It was a sickening performance. She was desperate to project wealth and stability to her country club friends, even as her actual financial reality was burning to ashes behind the scenes. Her credit cards were frozen, her husband was facing the wrath of the mob, and she was busy choosing the perfect filter for her fake life. Once she was satisfied with her digital masquerade, she turned her attention to her primary obstacle: me. She walked into the kitchen and returned carrying a small silver tray with 2 identical ceramic mugs. A sickly sweet aroma of chamomile and peppermint filled the room, masking the heavy chemical undertones I now recognized instantly. She walked over to my armchair, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She handed me one of the mugs, her face twisted into a grotesque mask of fake concern. "Happy Thanksgiving, Deacon," she chirped, her voice dripping with artificial affection. "I brewed a special batch of your favorite herbal tea this morning. It is a holiday after all, and I want you feeling as relaxed and comfortable as possible." She stood over me like a predatory hawk waiting for its prey to succumb. I looked at the dark liquid swirling in the mug. She had completely abandoned the subtle microdosing strategy she had been using for the past 3 weeks. This was not a mild sedative meant to make me slightly dizzy. The pungent smell and cloudy texture told me everything I needed to know. She had spiked this specific cup with a massive, overwhelming dose of the heavy antipsychotic medication. She wanted me entirely incapacitated, a drooling, helpless vegetable by the time the medical transport van arrived at 9:00. She leaned closer, her icy blue eyes locking onto mine with undisguised malice. "Drink it while it is hot, old man," she commanded, dropping the sweet act for just a fraction of a second. "You have a very big day ahead of you, and we need you absolutely calm for the transition. You do not want to make things difficult for Javon, do you?" Her arrogance was simply astounding. She truly believed she held all the power in the room. She thought she was a mastermind playing a flawless game of chess against a senile invalid. She had no idea she was nothing more than a pawn walking blindly onto a board I completely controlled. I wrapped my trembling hands around the warm mug, playing my part to absolute perfection. I let my jaw hang slightly slack, looking up at her with wide, vacant eyes. "Thank you, Courtney." I mumbled, my voice weak and raspy. "You are always so kind to me. You take such good care of this family." A genuine look of supreme disgust flashed across her pale face. She hated me. She hated my bloodline. She hated the very fact that she had to breathe the same air as me for another hour. "Just drink the tea, Deacon." She snapped, her patience wearing incredibly thin. "I need to take a picture of us together for the family album before we eat." She was rushing the process, desperate to see my eyes roll back into my head. I brought the rim of the mug to my lips, letting the hot steam hit my face. I pretended to struggle with the weight of the ceramic, acting as though my motor skills were rapidly failing. That was the precise opening I needed. The very second she turned her back, her attention entirely consumed by her vain digital performance, my trembling hands instantly steadied into a rock-solid grip. I moved with a sudden fluid speed that betrayed decades of intense physical labor and disciplined focus. Without making a single sound, I reached out and grabbed the second mug resting on her silver tray, the safe, untainted tea she had poured for herself to complete the picture of a cozy holiday morning. In one lightning-fast, seamless motion, I completely swapped the 2 identical ceramic mugs. I placed the heavily spiked poisonous tea directly onto her side of the tray, exactly where her cup had been, and pulled her clean chamomile blend into my own hands. I settled back into my leather armchair, resuming my slouched, defeated posture in the blink of an eye. By the time Courtney turned back around, gripping her smartphone with an irritated scowl, I was slowly taking a deep, deliberate sip of the clean herbal tea. "Oh, this is delicious, Courtney," I whispered, letting my voice shake, perfectly mimicking a confused elderly man, just the way I like it. Very warm and comforting. Courtney smiled a dark, victorious grin. She walked over and picked up the remaining mug from the silver tray, completely unaware that she was holding the exact lethal concoction she had designed for me. "I am so glad you like it, Deacon," she said, raising the ceramic rim to her own painted lips. "Here is to new beginnings and fresh starts." Without a single moment of hesitation, she tilted her head back and took a massive gulp of the tea, swallowing the heavy dose of antipsychotic sedatives in one smooth motion. She lowered the mug, letting out a satisfied sigh, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just voluntarily sealed her own catastrophic downfall. She tapped her phone screen, preparing to capture the moment of her ultimate triumph over my family. I sat back and watched the poisonous liquid travel down her throat, my expression an unreadable mask of cold authority. She had made her bed, and now she was about to forcefully sleep in it. She opened her mouth to issue another commanding order to her spineless husband. But before a single word could escape her lips, a deafening noise shattered the quiet holiday morning. It was not the gentle chime of the doorbell. It was a violent, aggressive pounding against the heavy oak front door. The strikes were so brutal and relentless that the antique wood groaned and the glass panes rattled in their frames. The loan sharks had arrived exactly on schedule. The heavy oak front door did not just swing open. It was violently kicked off its brass hinges, sending splintered wood and metal hardware flying across the polished foyer. The three massive underworld enforcers from the other night stormed into my home, crushing Courtney's expensive holiday decorations beneath their heavy steel-toed boots. The scarred leader marched directly into the dining room, pulling a heavy black handgun from the inner pocket of his leather jacket. He did not waste time with threats or negotiations. He pointed the weapon straight at Javon's chest. The polished, confident facade of the successful businessman instantly shattered into a million pieces. Javon let out a pathetic, high-pitched scream and collapsed completely to the hardwood floor. He fell to his knees, crawling backward like a terrified animal until his back hit the edge of the mahogany dining table. "Please do not shoot me," Javon begged, his voice cracking with pure, unadulterated terror. "I have the money. I have exactly what I promised you. Please just let me get the papers." He raised his hands in a frantic gesture of surrender, tears of sheer panic streaming down his face. Courtney stood frozen near the roasted turkey, her eyes wide with shock. The heavy dose of antipsychotic sedative she had unknowingly consumed was already beginning to severely cloud her usually sharp reflexes. She watched her husband cower like a frightened, helpless child, completely useless in the face of real physical danger. Javon scrambled frantically on his hands and knees, reaching into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out the thick legal packet he had forced me to sign just days ago. His hands shook violently as he thrust the crumpled documents toward the towering enforcer. "Here it is," Javon cried out, his voice desperate and shrill. "This is the deed to the house and the fully executed power of attorney. This property is worth easily over $1 million. You can take the whole thing. Just clear my debt and let us walk away right now." The scarred leader did not take the papers. He looked down at my son with an expression of absolute, profound disgust. He slowly lowered his weapon and took a deliberate step forward. Without a single word of warning, the massive man swung his heavy hand and slapped Javon across the face with devastating, brutal force. The sound of the physical impact echoed through the dining room like a loud gunshot. Javon was thrown sideways, crashing hard against the thick wooden leg of the table, blood instantly pouring from his split lip. He whimpered, clutching his face in total shock. "You really think I am a stupid man, Javon?" The leader growled, his deep voice radiating lethal menace. "You think you can hand me a piece of garbage and call it $1 million? He reached into his own leather jacket and pulled out a crisp white document, tossing it aggressively onto the table right next to Courtney's elaborate cranberry centerpiece. "That is a certified land registry search I had my lawyer pull yesterday morning," the enforcer stated, pointing a thick finger at the official paper. "Read it very carefully, you pathetic little boy." Javon scrambled up slightly, his trembling hands grabbing the document. His eyes darted across the bold legal text and all the remaining color completely drained from his bruised, bleeding face. The official property search clearly detailed the current ownership of my home. It did not list Javon Wright as the owner. It did not even list Deacon Wright. The document legally proved that the house and the valuable land it sat on had been permanently transferred into an impenetrable, irrevocable blind trust over a week ago. That power of attorney you are holding is entirely worthless. The leader spat, taking another step toward my cowering son. You cannot leverage a property you do not own, and your father does not own it either anymore. You tried to pay off a blood debt with fake documents while planning to flee to Europe with $500,000 in a hidden offshore account. You took us for absolute fools. Javon stared at the paper, his mind completely fracturing under the weight of the truth. No. He stammered frantically, flipping through his own useless packet. No, this is a terrible mistake. I have the medical certificate. I have the signature. I own this house. The enforcer kicked Javon's forged packet out of his hands, scattering the worthless papers across the room. You own absolutely nothing. The leader roared, leaning down to grab Javon by the collar of his expensive shirt, pulling him forcefully to his feet. And now your time is completely up. Courtney let out a sluggish, confused gasp, gripping the edge of the table as the heavy sedatives began to violently drag her nervous system down into the dark. Javon choked on his own blood, his eyes darting frantically around the chaotic room until they finally landed on me. He expected to see a terrified, confused old man shrinking away from the extreme violence. He expected to see the frail father he had successfully manipulated and drugged into submission. Instead, he saw absolute chilling serenity. I remained seated in my leather armchair, completely unfazed by the broken door, the screaming, or the loaded handgun resting just feet away from my chest. I did not flinch when the gangster struck my son. I did not blink when the fake deed was brilliantly exposed. I simply picked up the heavy silver carving knife from the table. With slow, meticulous precision, I reached forward and sliced a perfect thick piece of roasted turkey from the holiday bird Courtney had staged. I placed the meat onto my porcelain plate, setting the knife down with a soft, deliberate clink. I picked up my fork, cutting a small bite and bringing it to my mouth, chewing slowly while maintaining unblinking, intense eye contact with the son who had tried to destroy me. Dad. Javon whispered, his voice trembling with a sudden terrifying realization. What did you do? You planned this. You set me up. I swallowed my food, wiping my mouth gently with a linen napkin. I did not set you up, Javon, I replied, my voice projecting cold, heavy authority across the room. You dug your own grave the exact moment you forged my name. You climbed into the casket the moment you planned to lock me in a psychiatric ward. I simply provided the dirt to bury you. Javon stared at me, his jaw dropping as the absolute gravity of his massive failure finally registered in his desperate brain. The frail, demented old man was a complete illusion. He was staring directly at the ruthless architect of his total destruction. He looked from me to the violent loan sharks, realizing he was entirely trapped in a secure cage of his own making. There was no escape. There was no secret money. There was only the brutal consequence of his endless greed. The scarred leader tightened his iron grip on Javon's collar, raising his heavy fist to deliver a crushing, lethal blow. But before his knuckles could make contact with my son's face, a sharp, piercing sound cut through the cold morning air. The distinct, aggressive wail of police sirens echoed in the distance, rapidly approaching our specific street. The loan sharks immediately froze, their ingrained survival instincts completely overriding their violent anger. The leader dropped Javon to the floor, shoving his handgun safely back into his leather jacket. "We are not done here," he snarled at my son, backing away quickly toward the shattered front entrance. "You better pray the cops lock you up in a deep cell, because if they do not, we will find you." The three enforcers turned and sprinted out the broken door, disappearing rapidly down the street just as the sirens grew deafeningly loud. Javon stayed on the floor, gasping for air, believing the approaching police were his ultimate salvation. He thought he could lie his way out of the mess, claiming a violent home invasion. He thought the authorities would protect him from the mobsters. He was completely wrong. The heavy footsteps that marched up my porch and crunched over the broken glass did not belong to armed police officers. A tall man in a sharp gray suit stepped through the ruined doorway, holding a thick stack of manila envelopes. He looked around the chaotic dining room, entirely unimpressed by the physical destruction. He was a commercial court process server, and he was holding the exact documents that would legally obliterate the very last shred of Javon's and Courtney's fake luxury life. The man in the sharp gray suit stepped carefully over the splintered remains of my front door, completely ignoring the drops of blood Javon had left on the floorboards. He did not look like a police officer. He did not carry a weapon or a badge. He carried the heavy, undeniable weight of the commercial court system. He walked straight into the dining room, his polished shoes crunching loudly over the broken glass and shattered wood. "Are you Javon Wright and Courtney Wright?" He asked, his voice a flat, mechanical monotone that cut through the lingering panic in the room. Javon, still kneeling on the floor, clutching his bruised and bleeding face, simply nodded in a helpless daze. Courtney, leaning heavily against the dining table, managed a weak, confused yes, her voice trembling. The man did not offer a polite holiday greeting or ask if anyone was injured. He simply raised the two incredibly thick manila envelopes he was holding and tossed them directly onto the center of the staged Thanksgiving table. The heavy legal packets landed with a loud, sharp smack right next to the pristine roasted turkey, knocking over a crystal glass of water and scattering red cranberries across the expensive linen tablecloth. "You have been officially served," the man stated, turning on his heel and walking right back out the shattered door without another word, leaving a suffocating silence in his wake. Javon pushed himself up from the hardwood floor, his hands shaking so violently he could barely grip the thick envelope bearing his name. Courtney sluggishly reached for hers, tearing the top open with clumsy, uncoordinated movements. Javon pulled out a massive stack of legal documents printed on heavy formal paper. His eyes darted across the bold black headers. It was a commercial eviction order and an immediate asset seizure notice. The documents explicitly detailed that his startup office space was being permanently locked down by court order. Courtney's papers were absolutely identical. They contained a brutal, uncompromising demand for the immediate vacancy of her luxury fashion boutique on Fifth Avenue, citing 8 months of unpaid rent and massive accrued financial penalties. Every single piece of designer inventory, every dress, and every handbag she had in that store was legally seized to cover the massive debt. The holding company was exercising its absolute right to terminate the commercial leases immediately, without any further grace period or negotiation. Javon frantically flipped through the dense legal pages, desperately looking for a loophole or a contact name to negotiate with. He scoured the plaintiff's section, expecting to find the name of some faceless corporate entity he could easily manipulate or sue in civil court. He reached the very last page of the document, where the official signature of the property owner and corporate president rested. Javon stopped breathing completely. The blood drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. He stared at the bold, sharp cursive signature with the distinct loop on the D and the rigid, sharp underline beneath the W. It was my signature. The exact, authentic, legal signature he had tried and miserably failed to forge just a few days ago. The name printed in bold, uncompromising letters beneath the signature line was Deacon Wright. Javon slowly looked up from the papers, his eyes wide with an absolute soul-crushing horror. "You," he whispered, his voice cracking under the incredible weight of the impossible truth. "You own the commercial building." I picked up my linen napkin and dabbed the corners of my mouth with total calm. "I have owned that building for 25 years, Javon," I replied, my voice radiating pure, unyielding power. "I own the building where you rent your office. I own the retail space where your wife sells her overpriced dresses. I own the very ground you have been pretending to stand on. You thought you were successful entrepreneurs building a modern empire. You were nothing but highly subsidized tenants living on my quiet charity, and your rent is officially past due." The truth struck them like a physical blow. The old retired postal worker was a phantom. The man sitting at the head of the table was a ruthless real estate titan who had just formally evicted them from their own fake lives. The entire universe Javon and Courtney had built for themselves instantly collapsed into worthless ash. The arrogant socialite facade was utterly obliterated in front of their own eyes. The frail black man they had endlessly mocked, horribly abused, and aggressively tried to throw into a psychiatric ward was not just a retired mechanic waiting to die. I was the silent millionaire landlord who held their entire financial existence firmly in the palm of my hand. They had built a life of luxury and intense entitlement, completely blind to the fact that I was the one paying the foundational bills keeping them afloat. Javon fell back into a dining chair, burying his bleeding face in his hands. He was completely broken legally, financially, and spiritually. Beside him, Courtney was experiencing a very different kind of total catastrophic collapse. The massive lethal dose of antipsychotic sedatives she had unknowingly consumed from her own spiked tea was now fully hitting her central nervous system. Her pupils dilated widely and her eyelids drooped heavily. A heavy, suffocating chemical fog rolled over her brain, aggressively shutting down her cognitive functions. She tried to read the eviction notice again to find some sort of mistake, but the bold black letters blurred and danced wildly across the white page. Her perfectly manicured fingers went completely numb, dropping the heavy legal documents onto the floor. Her knees buckled under her own weight, causing her to violently sway side to side. She reached out blindly, grabbing the edge of the mahogany dining table to keep from crashing to the hardwood floor. The heavy poison she had maliciously mixed specifically for me was rapidly dragging her down into a dark, irreversible chemical abyss. She looked at her trembling hands, then slowly looked over at the empty ceramic mug resting on the silver tray. The horrifying realization finally pierced through her heavily sedated mind. She had ingested the poison herself. Courtney gasped desperately for air, her lungs struggling to function properly under the heavy pharmaceutical suppression. She stumbled sideways, knocking over a heavy wooden chair which crashed loudly to the floor. Every single escape route she thought she had was now permanently locked. Her luxury business was seized, her credit cards were completely frozen, her husband was marked for death by the mob, and her own body was rapidly shutting down from her own toxic trap. She looked at me, sitting perfectly calm at the head of the table, sipping my clean herbal tea with the unshakable posture of an untouchable king. Her icy blue eyes widened with a potent mix of pure, absolute terror and rabid animalistic fury. She realized she had never been the apex predator in this house. She had always been the helpless prey walking blindly into a perfectly designed slaughterhouse. The entire illusion of her racial and financial superiority was completely dead. She pointed a shaking, manicured finger directly at my chest, her pale face contorting into a grotesque mask of pure, desperate rage. She drew in a ragged, shallow breath, fighting aggressively against the heavy sedatives to force the final words out of her burning throat. "You are a monster," my daughter-in-law sneered across the Thanksgiving table. I simply set down my glass of tea and replied, "How does it feel to know that the ultimate betrayal is coming your way today?" Courtney swayed violently on her designer heels, her mind rapidly sinking into the dark chemical abyss of the heavy antipsychotic drugs. She slurred the words, calling me a monster one final time, but the physical fight was rapidly draining from her veins. Javon, however, was backed into a corner of pure, desperate madness. He looked at the commercial eviction notices scattered across the table and then looked at me with wild, feral eyes. He thought he still had one last card to play. He truly believed physical force could somehow reverse the permanent legal trap I had locked him inside. He lunged forward, wiping the blood from his split lip, his hands balling into tight, aggressive fists. "I am going to make you fix this, old man," Javon screamed, his voice cracking with hysterical panic. "You are going to call your lawyers right now and sign everything back over to me, or I swear I will tie you to that chair myself. We still have the medical transport waiting outside. I am locking you in a padded cell, and I will beat the passwords out of you if I have to." He took a violent step toward me, preparing to wrap his hands around my throat. Javon raised his hand to strike me, but he never got the chance to land the blow. The heavy footsteps I had been waiting for finally thundered onto the front porch. The two men who had been waiting outside, initially disguised as private medical orderlies, stepped boldly through the shattered ruins of my front entryway. Javon turned his head, his frantic expression twisting into a sudden grin of absolute relief. He actually thought his hired thugs had finally arrived to drag me away to the psychiatric ward. "Get in here and restrain him," Javon ordered aggressively, pointing a shaking finger directly at my chest. "Tie him down right now. He is completely out of his mind, and he is a danger to us." The two tall, broad-shouldered men marched directly into the dining room, their heavy boots crunching over the broken glass left behind by the loan sharks. But they did not reach for a canvas straitjacket. They did not pull out leather medical restraints or heavy sedatives. The man on the right reached into the inner pocket of his dark tactical jacket and pulled out a gleaming gold shield. "Federal Bureau of Investigation." The agent announced, his voice a booming thunderclap that brought the entire room to a dead, freezing halt. "You are under arrest." Courtney dropped her phone entirely. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp, loud crack, mirroring the sudden, violent destruction of their entire reality. "What is going on?" She shrieked, her heavily sedated brain failing to process the federal intrusion. The second agent moved with terrifying tactical precision. He grabbed Javon by the shoulder, spinning him around with forceful authority and slamming him hard against the dining room wall. "Javon Wright, you are under federal arrest for money laundering, aggravated wire fraud, felony identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes," the agent stated firmly, expertly securing heavy steel handcuffs around Javon's wrists. "You have the right to remain silent." The remaining shreds of Javon's arrogant swagger instantly evaporated into thin air. The confident businessman, the ruthless mastermind who tried to steal his father's legacy, completely crumbled into dust. His knees buckled beneath him, and he let out a pathetic guttural sob. He slid down the painted wall, landing in a miserable heap on the floor, crying like a terrified, helpless child. "Dad, please," he wailed, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Dad, tell them there is a huge mistake. Please, you have to help me. I am your son." I stood up from my chair, adjusting the cuffs of my cardigan, and looked down at the pathetic traitor weeping at my feet. "I cannot help you, Javon," I replied, my voice echoing with icy, absolute finality. "I am just a crazy monster, remember?" Javon thrashed against the cold steel handcuffs, hyperventilating as the absolute reality of federal prison loomed ominously over his head. The FBI agents hauled him roughly back to his feet, completely ignoring his pathetic pleas for mercy. Realizing that I was entirely unmoved by his tears, Javon frantically turned his desperate gaze toward his wife. "Courtney, help me!" he screamed, his voice echoing through the ruined house. "Call your father right now. Call your corporate family lawyers. Tell them to bring the bail money immediately. They have millions sitting in their trust funds. You have to get me out of here before they process me into a cell. Tell them it was all a massive misunderstanding with the business accounts." Courtney leaned heavily against the mahogany table, fighting a losing physical battle against the massive dose of sedatives raging through her bloodstream. She blinked sluggishly, her mind desperately trying to clutch onto her deeply ingrained sense of white privilege and generational wealth. She truly believed her affluent parents could simply write a massive check and magically erase a federal criminal indictment. She clumsily dropped to her knees, searching the floor for her fallen smartphone. "Hold on, Javon," she mumbled her words, slurring heavily, her perfectly manicured hands shaking as she grabbed the cracked device. "My dad will fix this. He knows federal judges. He will destroy this old man in court. We are going to take everything from him. Just let me dial the number." She blindly jabbed at the shattered screen, fueled by a toxic mixture of pharmaceutical drugs and sheer desperate arrogance. She was fully prepared to throw her entire family's fortune into a lengthy legal battle to protect her fake empire. She still thought she possessed a hidden advantage over me. She still thought there was a shred of dignity left to salvage from the wreckage of her life. I stood perfectly still, watching her fumble with the broken smartphone. I could have let her make the phone call. I could have let her drag her prestigious, wealthy parents into the very center of this humiliating federal nightmare. But I had absolutely no intention of letting her control the narrative for even a single second longer. The time for allowing them to think they had any power left was officially over. I reached into the deep pocket of my slacks and pulled out a sleek black remote control. Courtney was holding the phone to her ear, waiting for her father to answer, ready to spin a web of desperate lies. Javon was sobbing quietly against the wall, completely broken by the handcuffs binding his wrists. I slowly raised the remote and aimed it directly at the massive 80-inch flat-screen television mounted securely above the brick fireplace in the center of the living room. With a cold, methodical precision, I pressed a single red button. The giant screen instantly powered on, flooding the dimly lit room with a bright, blinding light. The sudden flash caught both Javon's and Courtney's attention, pulling their terrified eyes toward the digital display. The FBI agents paused their protocol, watching the screen come to life. The final, absolutely devastating piece of evidence was queued up and ready to play. The ultimate betrayal was about to be broadcast in ultra-high definition. The massive 80-inch screen flickered to life, displaying a crystal-clear high-definition video that sucked all the remaining oxygen straight out of the room. It was not a financial document or a forged deed. It was raw, undeniable surveillance footage captured perfectly by the private investigator Elias. The camera angle was fixed from a discreet vantage point inside a luxury hotel suite overlooking the city skyline. On the giant screen, Courtney was tangled in the expensive silk bedsheets, completely undressed and aggressively kissing another man. The man was not a stranger to anyone in this house. It was Rick, the corporate zoning consultant she had been plotting with to steal my land and demolish my neighborhood. The video played silently for a few agonizing seconds before the crisp audio track kicked in, syncing perfectly with their breathless movements. Courtney's voice echoed loudly through my living room speakers, dripping with pure malicious contempt. "Javon is such a pathetic idiot." She laughed on the recording, running her hands through Rick's hair. "He actually believes this zoning project will make him a millionaire. He is forging the paperwork for us while we sit here enjoying his money. He is so desperate for my approval, he does not even realize we are setting him up to take the fall for the entire federal fraud scheme. I cannot wait to file the divorce papers the second the FBI locks him up." The sound of his wife's mocking laughter filled the dining room, vibrating against the walls like a brutal physical assault. Javon stopped breathing. His tear-streaked face turned an ashen, ghostly gray as he stared at the giant screen, watching the woman he had betrayed his own father for casually plan his federal imprisonment and complete financial ruin with another man. The illusion of his perfect marriage, the ultimate justification for all his horrific crimes, shattered into a million jagged pieces. For a moment, the only sound in the house was the undeniable audio of Courtney's betrayal playing on an endless loop on the television. Then something inside Javon's mind completely and violently snapped. A guttural, primal scream ripped from the very bottom of his throat, an ugly sound of pure, unadulterated madness. Driven by a blind, explosive fury, he ignored the heavy steel handcuffs binding his wrists behind his back. He launched his entire body weight forward, hurtling across the dining room like a deranged animal. Courtney was still kneeling on the hardwood floor, staring at the television screen in absolute paralyzed horror, the cracked phone slipping from her trembling fingers. She did not even have time to scream before Javon collided with her. He tackled her viciously to the ground, knocking over the scattered dining chairs and sending them both crashing into the corner of the room. Since his hands were cuffed behind his back, he could not punch her. Instead, he wrapped his muscular legs around her torso, pinning her down, and lunged his face toward her neck, biting and headbutting her with a rabid, psychotic desperation. "I am going to kill you!" Javon roared, spitting blood from his split lip directly into her face. "You used me. You set me up to rot in a cell while you planned to run away with that corporate trash. You ruined my entire life." Courtney shrieked in genuine terror, kicking her designer heels wildly and thrashing against his crushing weight. The heavy dose of antipsychotic sedatives in her system severely delayed her reactions, making her clumsy and weak as she tried to shove his heavy torso off her chest. "Get off me, you psycho!" she wailed, sobbing uncontrollably, as her perfectly curated high society image was violently ripped apart in front of federal law enforcement. The grand illusion of their modern, sophisticated family had devolved into a pathetic display of two criminals trying to slaughter each other on the floor of the very home they tried to steal. The two FBI agents immediately sprang into action. They shouted aggressive commands, rushing across the room to break up the brutal domestic assault. One agent grabbed Javon by the collar of his ruined suit, dragging him backward with brute force and pinning him face down against the carpet. The other agent quickly pulled a hysterical, heavily sedated Courtney to her feet, securing her wrists in a separate pair of heavy steel handcuffs. She was crying hysterically, her makeup smeared across her pale face, her expensive dress torn and ruined. The sickening theater of their marriage was officially over-ending in maximum public disgrace. As the federal agents wrestled the thrashing couple into total submission, I stood perfectly still near the head of the dining table. I did not intervene. I did not offer a single word of comfort or pity. I watched the spectacular collapse of their world with the cold, uncompromising eyes of a supreme judge, witnessing the execution of a highly justified sentence. Through the shattered remains of my front door, a harsh, mocking laughter drifted in from the street. I slowly turned my head and looked out onto the front porch. The three violent loan sharks had not completely fled the neighborhood when they heard the approaching sirens. Realizing the authorities were not local police responding to a home invasion, but federal agents executing a targeted raid, they had lingered in the shadows of the large oak tree in my front yard. The scarred leader stood just beyond the broken doorway, a dark silhouette against the morning sun. He was watching Javon crying and writhing on the floor, pinned under the knee of an FBI agent. The mobster looked directly at me, his eyes narrowing with a profound sense of newfound respect. He offered a slow, deliberate nod, acknowledging the absolute devastation I had expertly orchestrated. He had come to break my son's legs, but he realized I had broken my son's entire existence. The enforcers turned around and silently faded away into the neighborhood, satisfied that the debt had been paid in a currency far more brutal than cash. I turned my attention back to the ruined dining room. My house was a complete disaster zone. Broken glass crushed food and blood stained the floors. But to me, it looked perfectly clean. The infection had finally been lanced. The treacherous parasites feeding on my legacy had been exposed, neutralized, and bound in federal steel. I adjusted my glasses, feeling a deep, resonant peace settling into my bones. The board was entirely cleared. The deafening chaos inside the house was suddenly interrupted by the heavy rumbling sound of a large, specialized vehicle pulling up directly onto my front lawn. The heavy tires crushed the perfectly manicured grass, coming to a stop just inches from the front porch. The flashing red and blue lights of an armored federal transport van illuminated the shattered living room windows. Javon and Courtney both stopped their pathetic sobbing, turning their tear-streaked faces toward the bright flashing lights. The heavy sliding door of the armored van opened with a loud metallic clank. Two more heavily armed FBI agents stepped out, pulling a tall figure from the dark interior of the vehicle. The man was wearing a very expensive tailored charcoal suit, but his hands were securely shackled behind his back in heavy cuffs. It was Rick, the powerful, untouchable corporate zoning consultant. The man Courtney had kissed in my kitchen, the man she planned to run away to France with, was now a federal prisoner. The agent's frog marched him up my driveway, his face pale and twisted with complete, absolute defeat. The massive trove of financial ledgers, offshore accounts, and fake tax returns I had provided through Harrington had completely annihilated his invisible empire. The dirty real estate network was entirely eradicated. Courtney let out a horrifying, breathless gasp, staring at her lover in chains. The final nail had just been violently hammered into their collective coffin. Javon watched Rick being hauled up the driveway, his entire body trembling violently against the hardwood floor. The crushing reality of federal prison was no longer an abstract concept floating in his arrogant mind. It was standing right in his living room, wearing dark tactical gear and holding heavy steel chains. He twisted his neck, looking up at me from his pathetic position on his knees. His nose was bleeding profusely, and tears streamed down his swollen face, mixing with the dirt and broken glass scattered across the rug. "Dad, please," he begged, his voice a wretched, high-pitched whine that echoed pathetically through the ruined dining room. "You have the money. I know you do. I saw the commercial eviction notices. You are a secret millionaire. You own entire city blocks. You can hire the best federal defense attorneys in the country. You can pay the massive fines. You can make all of this go away before they book us. Please, Dad, just write a check. I cannot survive in a federal holding cell. I am not built for that. They will kill me in there." He thrashed against the agent's tight grip, desperate to crawl toward my shoes like a beaten dog. "Use your power, Dad. Save me. I am begging you on my knees." I looked down at the weeping man on my floor, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no sorrow, only the cold, hard truth of a completely severed bond. Javon tried to leverage the past, weaponizing his own childhood to extract one final ounce of my charity. "Dad, remember when I was a little boy?" He cried, sobbing uncontrollably, his chest heaving with desperate breaths. "Remember how you used to carry me on your shoulders down the avenue when we could not afford the bus fare? Remember how you worked those double shifts at the auto shop just to buy me that bicycle for my 10th birthday? I am your only son. We are blood. You cannot just stand there and let them take your own flesh and blood away in chains to rot in a cage. I made a terrible mistake, but I am still your boy. You are supposed to protect me from the world. You promised Mom on her deathbed that you would always look after me. Do not do this to me. Do not throw me away like trash." I remained perfectly still, letting his pathetic, manipulative pleas hang in the heavy air. "You want to talk about blood, Javon?" I replied, my voice dropping to a low, terrifying rumble that made even the hardened federal agents pause and listen. "You want to invoke the sacred memory of the mother who loved you more than her own life. You want to remind me of the endless sacrifices I made to keep you safe and fed while you grew up." I reached into the deep pocket of my slacks and pulled out a small cylindrical plastic object. I held it up between my thumb and forefinger, letting it catch the morning light streaming through the broken window. It was the amber prescription bottle with the scratched-off label, the heavy antipsychotic sedatives I had found hidden in the pocket of your expensive navy blue suit jacket exactly 3 weeks ago. I tossed the bottle onto the hardwood floor. It bounced with a sharp clatter, landing right next to Javon's bleeding face. He stared at the bottle, his crying instantly stopping as the blood completely drained from his cheeks. "You talk about a father's protection." I continued, stepping closer to him, projecting pure, unyielding authority. "You bought a massive $1 million life insurance policy on your own father and then conspired with your racist wife to systematically poison my morning tea. You planned to drug me daily until my mind completely dissolved so you could lock me inside a psychiatric ward and steal the home I built with my bare hands. You stood by in silence and watched while Courtney poured liquid poison down my throat, hoping I would become a drooling vegetable so you could pay off your pathetic gambling debts. You traded my sanity and my life for a plane ticket to France. You did not look at me as a father to be loved. You looked at me as a vulnerable bank account standing in your way." Javon stared at the plastic bottle, completely paralyzed by the undeniable physical proof of his monstrous betrayal. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The illusion that he could somehow manipulate his way back into my good graces with fake tears was entirely obliterated. He realized I knew absolutely everything. I had monitored every single treacherous step he took, and I had let him walk blindly into the abyss of his own making. "Do not ever invoke your mother's name to me again." I stated my words, cutting through him like a serrated blade, leaving deep, permanent wounds. The boy I carried on my shoulders, the son your mother and I raised with pride and absolute integrity, died a long time ago. He died the exact day you decided to put poison in my cup. He died when you chose a woman who despises your heritage over the man who gave you everything. The man kneeling on my floor right now is nothing but a greedy, soulless parasite wearing my last name, and I do not spend my hard-earned money to save parasites. Javon let out a broken, hollow wail, finally understanding the absolute finality of his harsh sentence. There would be no high-priced lawyers swooping in to rescue him. There would be no secret bail money wired from my massive corporate accounts. He was going to face the full, crushing weight of the federal justice system entirely alone. He was going to lose decades of his life in a small concrete box, stripped of his fancy tailored suits, his fake wealth, and his stolen pride. I stepped back, creating a physical and emotional distance that could never be crossed again, not in this lifetime. "Take him out of my house." I ordered the FBI agents, my voice completely devoid of any lingering emotion. "I am done looking at him." The agents hauled Javon forcefully to his feet, dragging him toward the shattered front door while he hung his head in total ultimate defeat. As the federal agents dragged Javon and Courtney out to the waiting armored transport vehicles, a heavy silence began to settle over the ruined dining room. The mobsters were gone. The corporate zoning shark was locked in chains. My treacherous son and his vicious wife were permanently removed from their fake thrones and stripped of their unearned power. But the war was not entirely over yet. There was still one final crucial battle that needed to be fought and won before I could finally rest. I looked out the broken front window past the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers. A plain white unmarked sedan pulled up to the curb, parking directly behind the armored FBI van. The doors opened and two familiar figures stepped out onto the sidewalk holding thick legal folders. It was Mrs. Sterling and her partner from Child Protective Services. They had arrived exactly on time, executing the emergency custody orders Harrington and I had secured just yesterday. Courtney saw them approaching from the back of the transport van. Her heavily sedated eyes widened as the terrifying realization of what was happening finally pierced her cloudy brain. She began to thrash violently against her handcuffs, screaming at the top of her lungs. The ultimate prize, the only innocent life trapped in this web of toxic greed, was about to be liberated. The battle for my grandson Leo had officially begun. Mrs. Sterling and her partner walked purposefully up the driveway, their expressions hardened masks of absolute professional resolve. Right behind them, stepping out of a sleek black sedan, was Harrington, my ruthless lead attorney, clutching a thick leather portfolio. They bypassed the shattered wooden frame of my front door, stepping directly into the chaotic ruins of my dining room. The FBI agents who were holding Courtney near the armored transport van paused, allowing the Child Protective Services investigators to approach the scene. Courtney was thrashing wildly against the heavy steel handcuffs, her heavily sedated mind finally grasping the specific, profound danger these new arrivals represented. She knew exactly who Mrs. Sterling was from my earlier threats. She recognized the official state badges hanging around their necks. The hazy chemical fog clouding her brain temporarily parted, pierced by the sharp primal terror of a mother realizing her ultimate prized possession was about to be legally ripped from her grip forever. "You cannot be here!" Courtney shrieked, her voice cracking wildly as she spit toward the investigators. "You have absolutely no jurisdiction over my family. We are affluent citizens. We do not deal with social workers or government handouts. We are untouchable." Harrington stepped forward, his polished shoes crunching on the broken glass, standing shoulder to shoulder with the federal agents and projecting an aura of pure legal annihilation. "You do not have a family anymore, Courtney," Harrington stated, his voice slicing through her hysterical screams with surgical precision. "You have a criminal enterprise and a heavily documented history of severe child abuse." Harrington opened his leather portfolio, pulling out a stack of pristine legal documents stamped with the heavy red seal of the family court judge. He held the papers up directly in front of her pale, sweating face, ensuring she could read the bold print despite her chemical haze. "By the immediate emergency order of the state, you are hereby permanently stripped of all parental rights regarding your 8-year-old son, Leo. The court has reviewed irrefutable medical evidence of your physical violence and psychological torture. Custody has been officially transferred to the only stable responsible adult remaining in his bloodline, his grandfather, Deacon Wright." Courtney let out a guttural, ear-piercing screech. The last fragile thread of her carefully curated high society persona snapped completely, violently unleashing the ugly, racist monster hiding just beneath her expensive designer skin. "You cannot give my son to this old ghetto trash!" She roared, her face contorting into an unrecognizable mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She thrashed against the two federal agents, restraining her completely, ignoring the overwhelming legal authority surrounding her. "He is a filthy, uneducated thug. He is nothing but black dirt. I spent years trying to wash the stain of his miserable genetics out of my boy. You are stealing a pure white child and handing him over to an absolute animal. I will not let you turn my son into another pathetic street criminal." Her vile, racist venom echoed loudly across my ruined dining room, bouncing off the walls and horrifying the federal agents holding her. They tightened their grip, disgusted by the sheer magnitude of her prejudice. Javon, who was being held by the other transport van, lowered his bleeding head in ultimate shame, too cowardly to even defend his own father or his own race against his wife's disgusting tirade. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch at her pathetic slurs. I stood tall, radiating the quiet, unshakable dignity of a man who had built an empire from the very dirt she despised. "You never saw Leo as a son, Courtney." I replied, my voice a deep, steady rumble that completely drowned out her hysterical ranting. "You saw him as a fashionable accessory, a prop for your fake social media life. You beat him because he dared to be proud of his heritage. You bruised his arm because he looked up to a man who works for a living instead of a coward who steals. The medical report from Dr. Thorne proves you left physical handprints on an innocent child. The audio recordings prove you psychologically abused him daily. You are not a mother. You are a racist, violent predator, and you will never breathe the same air as my grandson ever again. I promised to protect him from the monsters of this world, and I am making good on that promise right now." Harrington handed the official court order to Mrs. Sterling, solidifying the legal execution of Courtney's maternal rights without any possibility of appeal. Just as Courtney opened her mouth to unleash another wave of disgusting slurs, a small, quiet sound drew the attention of everyone in the room. The soft padding of footsteps echoed from the top of the wooden staircase. Leo appeared on the landing wearing his favorite superhero pajamas, holding his small stuffed bear tightly against his chest. I had instructed him to stay in my heavily soundproofed guest room upstairs, playing video games with noise-canceling headphones until I came to get him. But the sheer volume of the federal raid, the breaking glass, and his mother's unhinged screaming had ultimately drawn him out into the hallway. He stood on the stairs looking down at the absolute destruction of my living room. He saw the shattered front door, the broken glass, the armed federal agents and his parents bound in heavy steel chains. Courtney locked her wide, manic eyes onto his small frame. "Leo!" She cried out instantly, switching her tone from a violent, racist predator to a desperate, weeping victim. "Leo! Baby, come here right now. Come to mommy. These bad men are trying to take me away from you. Tell them how much you love me. Tell them I am a good mommy." She strained against the handcuffs, holding her arms out toward him, begging him to save her shattered narrative. She needed him to validate her existence. Leo slowly walked down the wooden stairs, his small hands gripping the banister. He looked at his mother sobbing and begging, her makeup ruined and her designer dress torn. He looked at his father, bleeding and cowering in the dirt, completely broken. Then he looked across the room directly at me, standing tall and secure. He did not hesitate for a single second. He did not run to the woman who had bruised his arm and cursed his blood. He did not look twice at the man who had failed to protect him. Leo walked straight past his mother, completely ignoring her desperate pleading cries as if she were a total stranger. He marched directly to my side, wrapping his small arms tightly around my leg, burying his face into my wool cardigan. He chose his true protector. He chose the bloodline that loved him unconditionally. Courtney let out a final agonizing wail as the absolute rejection from her own child shattered the very last piece of her soul. The toxic sedatives and the crushing psychological blow finally overwhelmed her system. She completely collapsed into the arms of the federal agents, a broken, heavily sedated shell of a woman who had just lost absolutely everything. "Get them off my property!" I ordered the agents, my hand gently resting on Leo's small head, protecting his innocent eyes from the pathetic sight. The FBI agents hauled Courtney toward the first armored transport van, shoving her roughly into the dark steel holding cell. A second team of agents dragged a weeping, completely defeated Javon toward a separate transport vehicle, ensuring the two treacherous criminals were permanently divided in their misery. They would not even get the comfort of riding to federal prison together. The heavy metal doors slammed shut with a loud, synchronized metallic boom echoing like a heavy gavel striking a sounding block. The flashing red and blue lights painted the walls of my ruined house as the armored van slowly pulled away from the curb, disappearing down the quiet suburban street, carrying my treacherous son and his monstrous wife away forever. The federal agents, the social workers, and my private attorney all quietly filed out of my house, offering respectful nods before driving away into the morning sun. I stood in the center of my shattered living room, holding my grandson tight against my side. The chaotic, violent storm had completely passed. The toxic infection was entirely gone. The house finally returned to an absolute, eternal silence. One exactly week had passed since that explosive Thanksgiving morning. The chaotic dust had finally settled, but the devastating shockwaves I unleashed upon my son and his wife were permanent and absolute. Javon was currently sitting in a freezing federal holding cell, facing a mandatory minimum sentence of 15 years in a maximum security penitentiary. His charges for aggravated wire fraud, identity theft, and federal racketeering conspiracy left him with absolutely zero chance of bail. He had no high-priced lawyers and no hope of a plea deal. Courtney suffered an even more spectacular and humiliating downfall. Her luxury boutique was completely liquidated by my management company, the storefront permanently boarded up with heavy plywood. The scandalous surveillance video of her hotel affair with Rick, coupled with her highly publicized arrest for child abuse, became front-page headline news. The public disgrace was so intensely toxic that her affluent status, obsessed white family officially disowned her. They legally severed all financial ties, refusing to pay a single dime for her defense. She was left rotting in a county jail, entirely abandoned by the elite high society she had so desperately worshipped and sacrificed her own child to impress. With the treacherous parasites completely removed from our lives, I began the meticulous process of erasing their footprints from my legacy. I refused to let my grandson grow up surrounded by the lingering ghosts of his parents' greed. The old brick house, the very place where I had raised a traitor, no longer felt like a home. It felt like a contaminated crime scene, tainted by their vicious lies and poisonous tea. I had no intention of redecorating it or renting it out to strangers. I wanted it completely wiped from the face of the earth. I contacted a prominent nonprofit organization dedicated to educational development in marginalized neighborhoods. I sold them the entire property, including the massive unified lot Rick and Courtney had drooled over for a single dollar. But the sale came with one strict, non-negotiable condition. They were to bulldoze the entire structure to the ground and build a state-of-the-art community library and youth center in its place. I stood across the street on a crisp Tuesday morning, holding Leo's hand, watching the heavy yellow excavators tear through the roof of my former house. The thick brick walls that had witnessed Javon's deceit and Courtney's racist venom crumbled into a massive pile of dust and rubble. The physical manifestation of their toxic memories was being violently crushed into the dirt. I was not just destroying a building. I was actively funding the resurrection of the very neighborhood Courtney had so fiercely despised. The new facility would provide safe spaces, advanced technology, and strong mentorship for hundreds of young, brilliant African-American children. I was planting powerful seeds of empowerment directly over the ashes of her sheer ignorance. Leo watched the demolition with wide, fascinated eyes, squeezing my hand tightly. He did not shed a single tear for the house. He understood even at 8 years old that we were making room for something far better. He watched the heavy machinery clear away the debris, knowing that the bad memories were being hauled away in dump trucks, never to return. The monster who had bruised his arm and the coward who had allowed it were officially erased from our physical world. With the physical cleanup fully underway, I turned my absolute focus to the financial battlefield. Harrington and I spent 3 grueling days in his high-rise office executing a series of aggressive legal maneuvers to permanently fortify Leo's future. The $12 million trust fund I had established was transformed into an impenetrable financial fortress. I hired a team of elite corporate auditors and 3 independent fiduciaries to manage the principal. We embedded ironclad stipulations into the core legal framework. If Javon or Courtney ever attempted to contact Leo, petition the court for visitation, or lay claim to a single penny upon their eventual release from prison, the trust would automatically deploy a massive legal defense fund to crush them in civil court. Their names were legally blacklisted from every single corporate entity I owned. I transferred the remainder of my vast commercial real estate portfolio into a newly formed holding company, severing any possible historical link they could ever try to exploit. They were financially excommunicated, scrubbed clean from my bloodline's ledger. They would leave prison with nothing but the cheap clothes on their backs and a severe felony record that would ensure they remained at the absolute bottom of the societal food chain for the rest of their miserable lives. I had built a towering wall of wealth and legal protection around my grandson, completely shielding him from the monsters who had brought him into this world. I made sure that my empire would only serve to elevate his future, ensuring that the cycle of greed and betrayal was permanently broken. It was late Friday evening. Leo was fast asleep in his new bedroom at our luxury penthouse suite, finally finding peace after weeks of psychological torment. I was sitting alone at the kitchen island reviewing the final architectural blueprints for the new community library when my old personal cell phone began to vibrate violently across the marble countertop. The caller identification flashed a stark, unmistakable warning. It was an automated collect call originating directly from the Federal Detention Center. It was Javon. I stared at the glowing screen for a long moment, feeling the cold, unyielding armor permanently sealed around my heart. I slowly reached out and pressed the green button to accept the charges, bringing the phone to my ear without saying a single word. "Dad." Javon sobbed, his voice echoing through the sterile prison line, sounding broken, terrified, and utterly alone. "Dad, please, I am so sorry. They are moving me to maximum security tomorrow. You have to forgive me. Please, just talk to me. Do not leave me in here." I listened to his desperate weeping pleas for exactly 3 seconds. I absorbed the full weight of his misery, verifying that the punishment had completely broken his arrogant spirit. Then, with a face as hard as carved stone, I pulled the phone away from my ear and ended the call. I flipped the device over, popped open the back casing, and pulled out the small plastic SIM card. I snapped the chip cleanly in half between my thumb and forefinger, tossing the broken pieces straight into the trash can. 6 months later, the bitter chill of that treacherous Thanksgiving morning had been completely washed away by the warm, salty breeze of the Atlantic Ocean. The heavy, oppressive walls of the old city were permanently gone, replaced by the expansive open architecture of a sprawling coastal villa bathed in golden morning sunlight. The air here was incredibly fresh, carrying the crisp, undeniable scent of sea salt and blooming jasmine, a stark, incredible contrast to the suffocating stench of greed and deception that had once plagued my everyday life. The massive floor-to-ceiling windows of my new magnificent home stood wide open, welcoming the rhythmic, soothing sound of the crashing waves hitting the private, pristine beach. There were no violent loan sharks lurking in the dark shadows. There were no false doctors knocking on my front door holding fake medical certificates. There were no ungrateful children plotting my demise from across a staged holiday dining table. There was only absolute, uninterrupted peace. The kind of profound tranquility that can only be truly achieved after you have ruthlessly purged every single parasite from your existence. I stood on the massive wraparound cedar deck holding a mug of clean, hot black coffee, letting the morning sun warm my weathered face. The vast kingdom I had spent my entire life building was finally totally secure. Down on the paved concrete driveway just below the wooden deck, my 8-year-old grandson Leo was deeply focused on a mechanical puzzle. He was kneeling next to a rusted vintage bicycle I had specifically purchased from a local antique shop down the coast. It was not a shiny new electric scooter or an expensive fragile luxury toy. It was a solid, heavy machine that required genuine patience, serious physical effort, and dirty hands to operate properly. I set my coffee mug down on the wooden railing and walked down the stairs, joining him on the sun-baked concrete. I handed him a heavy steel wrench pointing directly to the rusted, stubborn bolt securing the front wheel to the frame. "You need to apply steady, even pressure, little man," I instructed, guiding his small brown hands over the cold, solid metal. "Do not force it, or you will strip the bolt. Let the tool do the hard work for you." Leo grunted, his face scrunching up with intense, determined focus as he pushed all his body weight against the wrench. With a loud, metallic squeak, the stubborn, rusted bolt finally broke free, spinning loosely in the socket. A massive, brilliant smile instantly completely illuminated his young face. "I did it, Grandpa," he cheered, wiping a streak of dark black grease across his forehead with the back of his wrist. "Yes, you did," I replied, kneeling beside him and looking directly into his bright, innocent eyes. "That thick grease on your face is not dirt, Leo. It is the absolute, undeniable proof of your hard work. It is the honorable mark of a man who knows how to fix broken things instead of throwing them away or expecting someone else to do the heavy lifting for him." I took a clean cotton rag from my back pocket and gently wiped his cheek. For agonizing months, his mother had tried to aggressively brainwash him into hating his own skin, telling him that physical labor and his deep, rich heritage were things to be deeply ashamed of. I was actively, violently reprogramming his brilliant young mind daily. I pointed to my own weathered, heavily calloused hands, holding them up in the bright coastal sunlight. "Look at these hands, Leo. These are the hands of a proud African-American man who built an entire empire from absolutely nothing but grit and determination. They are rough and scarred because building a genuine, lasting legacy requires blood, sweat, and uncompromising honesty. You come from a long, proud line of resilient, brilliant kings and builders. Do not ever let anyone, especially people who rely on fake money and stolen privilege, tell you that your blood is anything less than absolute royalty. A real man earns his crown through his integrity, his unbreakable work ethic, and his unwavering respect for himself." Leo listened intently, absorbing every single word like a dry sponge soaking up fresh life-giving water. He puffed out his small chest, gripping the heavy steel wrench with a newfound sense of immense pride. "I am going to build an empire just like yours, Grandpa," he stated, his voice radiating pure, unshakable confidence. "I know you will." I smiled proudly, patting him on the shoulder. "But first we need to get this chain oiled and the tires patched up." We spent the next 2 hours working side by side under the clear blue sky, our hands stained with grease, our hearts completely full. The toxic dark shadow Courtney and Javon had cast over his innocent life was entirely, completely gone, erased by the bright coastal sun and the undeniable truth of his own immense worth. Watching Leo methodically scrub the rusted metal gears, I allowed my mind to briefly wander back to the shattered ruins of my former life. Society constantly conditions older generations to be passive, weak, and overly forgiving. They expect us to gracefully step aside, to quietly endure the gross, blatant disrespect of our grown children, to unconditionally fund their disastrous financial mistakes, and to peacefully fade into the background as fragile, helpless victims. They falsely equate old age with docile, pathetic submission. I proved them entirely, fatally wrong. My advanced age did not make me a weak, vulnerable target. It made me a patient, highly dangerous predator who knew exactly how to wait for the perfect moment to strike. I had foolishly believed for decades that parental love meant providing endless financial safety nets and infinite second chances regardless of the severe transgressions committed against me. But true, profound love, the kind of love that actually protects a family legacy, must be forged with absolute iron boundaries. You cannot negotiate with a malignant, fast-spreading tumor. You cannot bribe a greedy parasite to stop feeding on your lifeblood. You must ruthlessly, violently cut it out of your body before it completely destroys you from the inside out. Javon and Courtney thought my deep love for my only son would totally blind me to his unforgivable treachery. They thought the biological bond of fatherhood would act as an unbreakable magical shield, saving them from the devastating consequences of their own horrific actions. They fundamentally misunderstood the true nature of my character. I am a fierce protector of my bloodline, but I am also the supreme uncompromising judge of my own empire. When a branch becomes violently, irreparably diseased, you do not water it hoping for a miracle. You sever it completely without hesitation to save the rest of the healthy tree. I cut my own son out of my life with absolutely zero remorse because protecting the innocent, brilliant future sitting right next to me required the total annihilation of the guilty, treacherous past. I felt no lingering guilt whatsoever. I felt no sorrowful regret. I felt only the immense hardened strength of a patriarch who had successfully defended his true heir. Leo tightened the very last bolt on the freshly oiled bicycle chain. He stood up, wiping his hands on the grease-stained rag I had given him earlier. He looked proudly at the restored, functioning bicycle, then turned his bright gaze up toward me. The gentle ocean breeze ruffled his hair as he squinted against the bright afternoon sun. "Grandpa?" he asked, his voice soft and incredibly genuine, completely free of any underlying anxiety or fear. "Are you happy here?" I stood up to my full height, feeling the warm coastal sun radiating across my broad shoulders. I looked past my grandson, staring out over the vast, endless expanse of the deep blue ocean. The horizon was perfectly clear, completely free of any incoming storms or dark, threatening clouds. I thought about the traitors rotting away in their miserable concrete federal cells. I thought about the millions of dollars permanently locked away to secure this young boy's brilliant future. I thought about the total, absolute control I had reclaimed over my own existence and my own massive legacy. A slow, deep smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of polite, elderly resignation or quiet survival. It was the fierce, triumphant smile of an undefeated king who had decisively, mercilessly cleansed his entire kingdom of all its hidden venomous snakes. "Yes, Leo," I replied, my voice echoing with pure, unyielding power and absolute final peace. "I am perfectly happy, because a true king never lets monsters sit at his table. If there is one crucial lesson to take away from my story, it is that you should never mistake silence for ignorance and never mistake age for weakness. People who are driven by blind greed often underestimate the quiet strength of those who built the very foundations they casually stand on. True wealth is not found in designer clothes or stolen bank accounts. It is built on a solid foundation of integrity, hard work, and fiercely protecting the innocent. When you try to destroy the roots of a family tree out of sheer entitlement, do not be surprised when the heavy branches come crashing down directly onto your own head. If you found satisfaction in this story of ultimate justice, please hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful life lessons.